Okay, guys, hello and welcome back to Class A People. We've got my first ever other podcaster.
Oh God,
I know, the pressure's on now. This is Jamie from They Think It's All Sober. One of two. Finally split you up.
I know, finally.
Jamie and
Tom
run
yes.
They Think It's All Sober podcast, and we've managed to get Jamie to come down all the way from London to record an episode with us for Class A People, which I'm very excited about. We're going to deep dive into everything about you.
Oh,
everything.
Oh, God.
But where I like to start is childhood.
Yes.
The joys of.
The joys of, or lack thereof.
Okay.
No. I have a very... so interesting looking back, because I always preface this with I've always felt loved in my life. But my parents broke up when I was 3. Usual story, right? People's parents break up.
Yeah.
And I was brought up by my mum, my nan, and 2 aunts. So sort of very female
Women heavy
in my life, which I think had a super beautiful and positive influence on my life. Never really saw my dad, birthdays and Christmases, and I come from a very working class East End family. So my first memories of sort of alcohol were always in the pub, football, West Ham. My granddad was a big drinker, not in a negative way, but pub 4 pints in the afternoon, post work kind of guy. So I always had this really beautiful view of pub culture, etc. And my dad I never really saw, and I don't think it really was a conscious thought process growing up, because it was just me and my mum, and we were a team, and that was it.
Did you have siblings?
No siblings.
Okay.
Only child syndrome.
Put that on the list.
But yeah, I'd see my dad on birthdays and Christmases, but it wasn't really anything. We had somewhat of a relationship, but not really. And then when I was 9, my mum kind of called me in from playing with my aunties, and they were there, and it was one of those sinister moments. You're kind of what's going on here? And they told me my dad had passed away. And I think kind of through protectionism at the time, they'd never really... I think I was just so young and in life, I was oh, I didn't really ask how. I just kind of was oh, that's sad, and went back out to play again.
I suppose you don't know him being frequent in your life either.
No, I just had memories of him being over on birthdays and rolling Golden Virginia tobacco and the smell and whatever. Fond memories. They were nice. I don't think he was ever a bad man. But anyway, that was kind of the bulk of my childhood. I was really shy. I was really reserved. It was just me and my mum. I did feel very loved, and she always, sort of was there for me. But it was hard times. We grew up in a council flat, and I know she worked as hard as she could, but it was difficult. So when my father died, I guess you suppress that a little bit. I didn't know how he died. I think they said to protect me, it was a blood clot or a heart attack or something like that. So then fast forward a few years, I started to come out of my shell a little bit more. Yeah. I started being in bands, doing some acting stuff, which was mental because I was hiding
shy,
all the time
yeah.
when I was a kid, super shy. That changed my life. I kind of just fell into doing musicals and theatre and music, and I fucking loved it. So then at that point, I'd never even thought about alcohol. Alcohol was something that the adults did at football, or everyone around me kind of did.
Did your mum drink?
No.
Okay.
Not really at all. Not that I can remember. Which now, knowing what I know and what I found out when I was older, makes complete sense. So I then kind of would go to these local gigs, and people would be drinking. They'd offer me drink, and I'd just be I'm not interested. I was never interested. Everyone in my family smoked. My aunt drank, my grandfather drank. So I think I was just around it so much and offered it from a really young age. So I never saw it as taboo. And I think a lot of my friends from where I grew up, although I was sort of on one side of the tracks, they were all very wealthy and from affluent families that were Tarquin, you must not drink. So then they all rebelled, and they'd be at these gigs off their fucking nut. Yeah. And I was just never interested in it at all. So eventually you kind of start having a couple of beers and going to the pub when you're 17 with some mates, but it was never really...
We're going to the pub to get pissed.
Getting off my nut. No, yeah. and I enjoyed it. There were times, do you know what I mean? I'd have moments, and I remember cutting my eye open once. I'd slipped on some barbed wire and shit like that. But it wasn't until I was 18 and I kind of had this changing moment where I was at a house party and was having some drinks, and I opened this newspaper. And in the newspaper was my grandparents. And I was that's weird. And it was an article about what it's like to have a child die of heroin addiction and be in prison and all this stuff. And obviously it was my father.
Did you have a relationship with your grandparents?
Yes, but again, I was completely guarded from all of this.
Wow.
And so that was a real eye-opener for me, because I was just holy shit, everything I thought I knew about life. And obviously you grieve as a child growing up not having a father, but I was surrounded by so many beautiful women that supported me that I never really felt a lack of. But then reading that, I was fuck, I didn't, it just felt like everything crumbled in at that point.
Do you think though as well, because of kind of the things you were doing, sort of acting and musical theatre and things like that, which is kind of associated with more of a less of a macho guy kind of thing, that you didn't feel that need for, I don't know, that kind of stereotypical dad role of.
It's fascinating actually, because my auntie, who plays an amazing role in my life, she's a massive tomboy.
Okay.
And the day that my father passed away, I remember being 9 and both my aunts were there, and they'd always taken me to football and stuff. And I remember the exact words were like, "We'll be your dad now." Mm. And that's always stuck with me. It's such a beautiful thing. So I think I'd always had somewhat of a masculine influence, even like some of the lads at football, which is funny now looking back, because I was like 12 and they would have been like 30. We went away to like Plymouth for a night and they like taught me how to shave. Oh. So I had these like really beautiful influences in my life. But I think that moment of just opening the newspaper, it's so odd, because I remember it so vividly.
How old were you? 18?
18.
In a pub?
No, at a house party. Everyone's like going crazy around it. It was almost like a movie, and there's like me in slow motion, like what's this? And it was just like a local newspaper, and it was this story, about essentially, how my dad had died of heroin addiction and had been in and out of, Swansea prison. Nothing changed in me at that point to be like, oh, fuck it. I just think subconsciously that starts asking.
What
so
in that
questions.
Moment, what are you telling everyone around you, like, this is
I didn't tell anyone.
No.
I didn't even tell my family.
Did you carry on at that house party? Did you go home? Did you get pissed? Did you?
I just carried on. And that was the start, I think, of my life of like, everything's fine. The mask. That was genuinely, this sounds so overdramatic, the birth of Jamie Osmon, the character. Because I was just like, oh, I'm fine. And then it was like the loss happened again. And then in very quick succession, I think from that moment on, I had a lot of loss in my life. And I think that was kind of the tributary, I guess, to the river that became like drugs and alcohol becoming the main character.
You're grieving someone who been betrayed as this version of your dad, and then you open that newspaper and you're like, that's another version of him that I've got to mourn now. So
it just kind of started this pathway, and then it was all around the same time. Like my career took off, life took off, girls became a thing for the first time.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, boom. I didn't really have any developmental. It kind of went from like this shy child finding that out, and then
the
work
mask.
And everything went crazy. And then honestly, until I went sober, like just a character version of myself.
I think with that though, you would probably be the same. What you learn about yourself is that you became so one-dimensional as a human being.
Yeah.
Like you were a character of yourself. So how did you get into the music industry?
Well,
because you're saying you started at 17, like
so young, and actually it's a story built around loss, which is interesting. So where I grew up in a little town called Chesham, end of the Met Line, there was like nothing going on ever. And I remember my friend James and I were at a football match, and we saw his poster for this like local gig, like on a lamppost. And we were both like these shy kids. We're like, oh, we'll go to this gig. And we went, and it was full of like big metal guys with like long hair and like makeup and shit. And we were like, oh my God, like I loved Travis and fucking Top Loader. Do you know what I mean? Growing up. And I just opened my eyes to like community and music.
Yeah.
It was so inspiring. So I started to go every week from like 14 to 17. And it was run by this really amazing guy called Rafe. And he was in one of the local bands. And then one day, I think he went on holiday with his partner to Paris and just really tragically passed away. Had like an asthma attack. So we all like in the community were like, oh, this is such a shame. Like there was like 300 or 400 of us that would go every week. It was like such a stalwart of a thing. And then it kind of just stopped. So I remember speaking to his mother and being like, this is such a shame that this has stopped. Like, would you mind if I kind of took this on, kind of in his memory and built something from it? So we did, and we set up something called Rev's Place, and I kind of started out nothing, building gigs. So I was like putting all these gigs on when I was like 16, 17, Chesham, Amersham, like Wickham, Hemel Hempstead, Aylesbury. It was mental. And that was kind of my first foray into music. But I met some friends there, and they were like managing bands. Like, oh, that sounds fun. So just tried it. And then I was, one of the first bands I started managing, signed to Universal, and then another band kind of blew up. So very quickly, by like 20, I'd gone from like, nothing to sort of having a business whilst trying to do uni. I remember being on tour in China, like trying to do law modules. But then what comes with that is like the music industry and hanging around a lot of people who are a lot older, and you have insane imposter syndrome when you're like a shy, retiring, introverted person by nature that's created this extroverted character. And that's probably when like drink and drugs started to play a bigger part in my life. I partied and like I enjoyed drinking a lot with my mates down the pub and drinking snake bites and getting drunk. So like it wasn't like it went from 0 to 100. I probably had the natural progression of like 18 to 20, drinking with your mates, doing the thing. But then cocaine probably took grip over the next 10
that little
the
fucker.
next 10 years. Do you know what I mean? And that's what probably consumed me for a long time.
And drink and drugs provide a very good assistant with stuff like that, like 100%. To your masking. Yeah. You know, you can really accentuate that character when you're pissed and high.
Yeah, and I think
this is all from looking back. Do you know what I mean? Like, we didn't know at the time that we were alter egoing ourselves.
No, and everyone's like, oh, you're so, you know, because you remember at the time I was like 18 to 20 running these gigs for all these people. So everyone's like, oh my God, Jamie's doing all this stuff. So subconsciously you are like platformed, even if you're not platforming yourself.
I think as well with you, with that situation, obviously you are managing in charge of predominantly people that are older than you. So you need to probably act more mature than maybe sometimes you feel.
I used to have a trilby. I used to wear a fucking pork pie hat and like these Chelsea boots. And it's funny, the older I get, the more casual I dress. Because from like 18 to 25, I dress like a 40-year-old man. Yeah. Imagine like Ollie Murs on X Factor now. That is what I dress like at 18. And I look back and I'm like,
what was I doing?
Anyone love me? Yeah. Did they love me? Again, let's run that through the fucking coke addiction. But yeah, it's fascinating looking back now because it's like, I think all these things happened in a very short period of time. And then my first introduction to coke was in this exact same period where I'd never had like a girlfriend growing up, sort of until I was like 16, 17. I'd met this girl called Laura. We weren't together for long at all. But I remember one day I used to work part-time at House of Fraser when I was at uni, and I saw something pop up on Facebook. But yeah, really tragically, I read on Facebook that she'd been killed in a drink driving accident. And again, it was like a year after my dad had passed, I'd lost a grandparent. So all these like lost things are starting to.
So we're at 20,
triggered.
Right? And we've lost dad. Then we've also had to lose dad kind of a second time because we've realised how he really died. You've lost grandparents. You've lost Ray.
Yeah.
And now you've lost your first girlfriend. That's 5 before we've even gotten into 21.
Yeah. And it was a lot. And and that were kind of with the mask thing. I remember saying to my boss, oh my God, I just found out my ex-girlfriend's died. And it wasn't like, I was just felt so heartbroken for her family and in obviously such brutal circumstances. And his words were like, we shouldn't have been on Facebook at work. So I think instantly I was like, okay, fine.
Can't be sad about that. Yeah.
And then that night went to a local nightclub where the dubstep scene was popping at the time. God bless.
Nightclubs even there.
And then when we got back to my mate was like, oh, should we get some coke? And I'd never done drugs. I was so anti-drugs. I'd broken up with someone because they'd done pills before because I was so post-reading about my dad was like, I'll never do drugs. I won't be like him. Yeah. And then try coke. And then
fascinatingly as well, I think a lot of us now who are sober will say that the biggest drug of all is alcohol, you know, but because it's legal, we kind of condone that one.
We talk about that all the time because I think when you're younger, I certainly felt this at school. It was like, don't smoke weed. Yeah. Weed is the gateway drug. Yeah. And you're like, no, I'm like, no, gateway drug was like the fucking 12 pints that led to all of the bad decisions I ever made. And I think, but that's just the world, isn't it? It's like alcohol advertising, the way that it's portrayed, the way that it's been portrayed historically in movies, the way that life is portrayed of alcohol. But it's that it changes life for the better, and we all know it's like.
But it's also society, the way, you know, especially in the UK. You know, I was at a wedding at the weekend, right? And I was on the way home. I thought to myself, regardless of whether you're an addict, if you are somebody who just likes to have a casual drink or use weddings to like that's their like let go, be free. If you asked someone who's just your regular drinker, no drugs, to go to a social situation like that and be sober, I guarantee you they would find it difficult, not because they crave it and they're, you know, in terms of an addict form, but it's a security blanket for socializing. And like the society that we've all grown up in is any occasion, wedding, funeral, christening, birthday, any commiseration or celebration, there is alcohol there. Yeah. So we've never been conditioned to go to something, an event, or a birthday or a funeral or anything without it just being there, available.
I know. It's crazy. We talk about it a lot, or I'm trying to talk about it a lot in the music circles, because if you're a new artist and you play your first gig and they're like, oh, sorry, we can't afford to pay you, but there's 30 beers. So it's almost used as like a currency.
The what's it called? A rider.
Yeah, a rider. It's just like all alcohol, and they'd be like all like vodka bottles, and so you kind of create this like, I guess just like a pathway for people very early on that like alcohol is a reward.
Yeah.
And then I think once you do that, it just becomes such a staple for people in any industry.
So like, you got a new job, let's go out to drink. Oh, you lose your job, let's go and have a drink.
It's 5 o'clock on a Friday, let's go to the park. I'm not, and I'm sure you are, and obviously listen to what you've done, and it's great because it's non-judgmental in the way that we're trying to be, but, I'm very jealous of people that can have 2 beers and then leave it, like fair fucking play. But I do think there is a cultural issue around alcohol where people just rely on it so regularly. And you're bang on about the wedding thing, because I went to a wedding the other day and I was like the one that wasn't drinking, and that was fine because I'm so comfortable with myself with it not. But you're so right. If like just your average person went to an environment where they didn't know many people and suddenly had to be sat with strangers at a table and like let themselves go or like try and have some form of conversation, people would freak the fuck out.
I think the other thing you notice when you get sober, and again, it's not in a judgmental way, it's just a self-discovery journey, right? When you've unlocked yourself, or you're at least on that journey, you really notice people that are nowhere near that point, not because they're not necessarily an addict, but people who are using alcohol to kind of be someone that they're not. Yeah. You notice it a lot more. And I find that you notice the lack of depth for some people in what they're saying and how they're having conversation. Yeah. And you really notice people who have got their kind of alter ego, confident alcohol persona on. Yeah. It's so fascinating.
And it's hard because I think now where I'm at, maybe naturally, I'm sure maybe you're the same, every conversation tends to get quite deep quite quick just because I'm intrigued by people. And that's a lovely thing. And it's okay to have surface relationships, but I think I found in my 20s and definitely when I was kind of around kitchen tables at 5-6 in the morning, no one's really listening to each other. No. So you've got these like wildly surface relationships where it's like, we might not really have got on in the real world, but because you got on it and I got on it, we'll be sat around the kitchen table. No one's really listening to each other. So I think there's a really interesting thing with alcohol and Coke in particular, where it's like everyone's best friends, but the reality is that you're there for one common reason, and it's definitely not because you like each other.
No, and also I find cocaine just as a drug so fascinating because it's something that you can meet it's exactly like what you say. You can meet someone who you wouldn't get on with in the real, or you wouldn't cross paths in the real world. Yeah. And by the end of the night, you're planning a holiday, you're making a business idea. And, also my favourite thing is like, well, tomorrow we'll get started on that. And it's like rolling into 7 o'clock the following day. You're like, we're not doing anything tomorrow apart from either staying here on this session or going to bed and rotting, Exactly. Okay, so your first line.
Yes.
You'd never done coke before.
Never done any
You just
drugs.
Found out that your girlfriend has sadly passed away. And ironically, again, this is where I think back on lots of things in my life, the insanity, right, of the fact that your dad died of heroin, the fact that your girlfriend has had a drink driving accident, but you're still drinking. What's that like the first time you try it? Do you connect with it straight away?
I can't remember.
No. Were you quite pissed?
Very pissed.
Were you scared?
I was petrified. Yeah. And I was with like 3 friends, but I remember Coke didn't become the main character in my partying probably until my mid-20s, but I remember then it was like we'd get a gram, we'd split it between 4 or 5 of us, and go back and listen to like emo music, and it was this really bizarrely like kind of fond memories because we were all at uni. And then
I think it's okay for us to have fond memories of taking drugs.
Yeah.
Like I definitely have lots. I talk about it on my page. I tell funny stories. You can't go through what we've been through and not have some fucking great times.
Yeah, exactly.
Euphoric.
Exactly, and that's it. And that's that was my introduction to like raving, which was like into MDMA, and like that was when I'm old enough. I'm 36 now. When like methadone was a thing, and you could order like fucking. This is going to sound terrible to people on the internet that are younger that weren't around for this, but you could mail order this legal substance that was probably the most fucking insanely or terrible come down you'd ever have. So there was this period of like. It was just so odd for me because I had this constant juxtaposition. Work was going crazy. I had artists selling 2,000 or 3,000 tickets around the country. That didn't move into like monetary success. So I was like living comfortably, but I wasn't like loaded. But again, it's this sort of like, I guess, imposter syndrome, because on one hand, you're like 21, 22, you're having crazy success with work, you're selling out shows around the country, you're trying to be a businessman around the older people, but then you're also like internally like, am I good enough? Should I be here? Do I deserve to be? I'm sad this person's dead. Why did this person die? Are we going out tonight? Are we going to get fucked up? I've got work tomorrow. nothing made sense. So it just further like put the walls up around that character of myself. And it probably wasn't until my mid-20s when I sort of had a successful, business of my own and did some partnerships with Sony and stuff, that I sort of felt more secure in work and myself. And that's when maybe I let the partying take over, ironically. But at that time, it was just kind of fun. I was figuring myself out, but it definitely was this characterization. If you ask anyone locally, I think now about, this is going to sound really twatty talking in third person, but about like the Jamie Osmon of 2009, they probably would have just been like, oh yeah, he was just really fun and was out all the time. But internally, I was probably not enjoying it even then.
I think that imposter syndrome thing is a massive thing. Your lifestyle probably been quite different to most people of your age.
So different.
And they probably think, oh God, he's raking it in. Yeah. But you're saying, you weren't really, you were living comfortably, but you weren't what everyone else was probably thinking. Probably wasn't the same thing.
I probably have friends that left school or uni and went to work like running a Hertz rent-a-car and probably made more money than I did traveling the world doing music. I'd never change that for the world because the experiences were beautiful, and that's something I'm always, even to this day, I say if I was to get hit by a bus tomorrow, I've lived more life than I could ever imagine to have lived, and that's great. But it's just this constant thing, because the bit I enjoy is the creative element. But you've really, and I've had, this is what's so mental, like even in the depths of my own drug taking, I've had to then cancel shows because I've had artists who weren't in a good way. Something I'm really proud of, to be honest, is like I've never, bar maybe like the odd after party, I've never let my own issues cross into work. I've always been very much like, when I partied and did drugs, it was very much like with my mates.
Really?
Yeah. There'd be times that like I might cancel meetings the next day because I was hungover, and that's something I'm ashamed of now. And I know that like in the last 3 years, I'm like so much better at my job, but it's fucking funny looking back because I'm like somehow.
Did you not have crossover though from friends and work?
Yes, and that's a big issue in music because it's like super blurred.
Yeah.
So it's funny actually, because now saying this to you, people that are listening to my mates will be like, you fucking idiot, of course it blurred over. And I've never understood messy people that get fucked up. But ironically, that's probably what led me to like 13 years of doing it rather than like 5. I almost wish I crashed and burned because I was so high functioning. Yeah.
What about a situation though where an artist likes to get on it? Because I'm just sorry, I was so in that moment then of me being signed to you and your client. I'm thinking,
let's go.
Yeah, but like,
what kind of music are you making first off?
Deep house.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's a chilled vibe. Nice. Well, I'm talking probably from my sober days now, but if I was in active addiction, God knows what.
Like, I've got this Peruvian panpipe jazz record.
I've actually heard a pipe jazz record, which is very good.
There you go.
Very good.
And you could fuse that with the deep house. It's kind of like some Cafe Mambo vibes, and then you're away.
So I'm signed, basically.
You're signed. Done.
That's happened.
Deal's done.
But I would be that person to say to you, I think I hate the word druggy, but like if we were both in active addiction right now, and this situation, this hypothetical we're talking about, I would be I'd want to entice you to do it with me. So it would be like, so I'm just thinking of that situation of me being at a show, we're in the green room or whatever, we're backstage, and I want to do a line before going on, and I'm like, come on Jamie, have one.
I would see, that's what's so fascinating. It's interesting now because when I moved into dance music, that became more of a thing because it was different. But when it was like the band, I took it so seriously, and I think I cared so much about like the artists' careers. I had one act that had a real, up and down relationship with coke. But if he ever did it before stage, I didn't know about it. And like we would then maybe go to an after party and do it. But then the next day, but this is the thing, it's like now I look back and the next day, be like, oh, my voice is hurt. I'll be like, oh, maybe you've got a cold. I'm thinking about it now, it's probably because you were like hoofing lines. But I really tried to keep that, because the music industry is such a slippery slope, and I'd seen it happen. And I think, again, I'm grateful. Maybe it's for like my internal like monologue that was some point there was just like, never let yourself go beyond the point. So even now I look back, even when I was doing coke 3 or 4 times a week, I would never have said I was an addict. It's actually only been probably the first year of my sobriety I wouldn't have said I was an addict. It wasn't until we started doing the podcast that I realized what addiction, because in my head addiction was what I thought my dad was, which was like robbing people and like going out and having a score every day. And even though my dad, like, he actually had a job, which was crazy because he was a functioning addict, but to me addiction was like what you see in the street. It wasn't until I came out of it that I was like, holy fuck, I was probably doing like 3 or 4 grams a week minimum. Like, that is addiction.
Yeah.
But I just didn't. You shouldn't have to compare yourself to the worst addict to realize that you are one.
It's something I'm really interested in. Kind of changing that stereotype of what people do. I was the same. I thought the exact same as you. Someone on a park bench, drinking all day, sniffing drugs all day, taking drugs all day. When in fact, it needs to come down to your happiness. It's not about how many grams I did or how many grams you did, how many days your session was, how many days mine was. Yeah. Are you happy? Is your life manageable? Like, are you reaching your full potential in life? You know, are you being able to handle emotions? An addict is someone who can't say no. And somebody who, I mean, the big thing is like the drinking that goes with cocaine. And I'm trying to make people understand that a weekend binge user, and then you don't touch any alcohol in the week, but as soon as you have a beer touches your lips or a glass of wine, ding, bag. Like, just because you're doing it at the weekend, doesn't mean that there's not a problem there.
Was that where you were? Because I identify with
7 years I probably sat in that phase.
Yeah. Of like one sip of drink and instantly be like, we're calling it in.
Even if I probably after like the last 5 years, like I knew that even if I had the thought that I was going to drink, I was going to have to get the bag. So I'd get back sober, but then I wouldn't let myself have it until I'd had, you know, a couple of sips. But I knew for such a long time that I could not just drink. Yeah. And that's the bit that I fought for so long, because I don't want to give up. Well, I'm 20, 25, 24. I'm like, I'm not giving up. I knew though that the type of character that I have, I'd have to give it all up. Yeah. But actually, when I then started learning that your body creates a whole nother compound in your body when you do the two together called cocaethylene, which
like
is
fucking lethal, right?
10 times harder to give up than just alcohol or just coke. When I found that out, and I want to spread that as a message, because if I'd known that, I probably wouldn't have beaten myself up so much about why is it so fucking hard to, your brain creates, if brain is so powerful, it creates an association between the two. You've married them together. But the word addict, I think, needs to be broken down into, some people like to dress it up as dependency. Some people like to call it habit. I'm like, you can label it whatever you want. Yeah. Are you happy? Yeah. Do you think it's not, the normalization that I did with like drug driving, thinking, that, oh, it's fine. It's like there's things that there's levels of it. Yeah. Like you saying at the beginning of this interview, it was 4 of us sharing a gram. Yeah. The progression, the tolerance.
Yeah, to me, then doing 3 in one night.
To yourself, personal consumption. Yeah. But because it was, in the evening and I don't know, you were at a party, that's not a habit, that's not addiction. It's like...
I know, and it's fascinating you say that as well, because I think I was the same. Initially, it was like, right, 3 or 4 drinks, then as a group you might decide it. And then I became like, I was saying, like a cocaine planner the older I got into my sort of mid to late 20s, where it would be like, I'm going out on a Friday, so... But, maybe I'll pick up on the Thursday, and I wouldn't ever touch it. I'm similar to you. Like it never bled into like my sort of day to day, but I just would plan it. And then, but I was bad as well. I would call myself the Pied Piper of the sesh, because I would pull people into it, because I'd be like, I'd go to a gig, and then I had a friend who lived in Camden, and she had a flat, really nice flat, and then like it'd be like, oh, well, maybe we could all go back there, and you suggest that, and then when you'd get there, someone else would message being like, oh, I'll pop over, and then when there was 4 of you, well, then it made sense, but we can't just get 1 between us, so we may as well get 2. But then I knew I was going out on Saturday, so maybe I'll just get another one for myself. But then you do it that night, and it's this thought process that you're constantly schedule. Justifying yourself to a diary of drugs, which is fucking bonkers.
The other thing, and I'm sure you've had this, put yourself doing a session in a nice environment, all of a sudden it's all right. Like if we're not in a, in a crack den somewhere, then, it's, you kind of glamorize it to yourself. You make it acceptable because you're doing it in a fancy place, or I don't know, the amount of times I'd be like, that's a potential client, or, or a potential opportunity with this person. But the planning is very interesting. Like I sat in a phase where I would, if I got on it on a weekend, and my sessions very quickly would do a Friday through to Sunday, no stopping, and I would then punish myself so much, so I would have 2 weeks off. But then I'd get to that 2 weeks off and be like, I'm not an addict, I'm fucking fine.
In 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then Pilates class, I'm fine.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had a green juice. And then I'd be straight back to where I was 2 weeks prior to that. And I think then I started to creep in with maybe one midweek sesh. And that's when I realised that I can't just go out with a girlfriend for dinner on a Thursday night and have a glass of wine because I'm craving it.
Were you then like chasing it? So you might go for one drink with one person, but then you might know that there's like 4 people that are out for a work stew, and then you'd be like, hey, why don't we link?
Even though I would never usually hang out with them.
And you just create this whole ecosystem of like, basically, now I look back, facilitating your own desires.
Absolutely.
When at the time you're like, I just want to hang out with my pals, and actually it's like, no, I just wanted to take drugs.
And also, I know that doing drugs on my own is very, that I wouldn't ever possibly do that. So let me just maneuver this into a situation that's a party or a gathering or a thing. So then it's okay. I think I definitely did have that in the back of my mind. I really remember when it went from, I was with someone at the time, we lived together in Brixton. He used drugs, but he would be able to go to bed. Hate those people. I remember very clearly, me wanting to get more, and actually I'd already ordered it. And he was like, Hannah, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm going to bed. And I just stayed up on my own. And by the time he'd woken up, I was still up. That, I think, is a turning point for people, starting to use on your own. These things are the red flags. People ask me that a lot, like, oh, what's the difference between a recreational user and a addict? I do think there's a difference there. Do you?
I think let's even coin it with alcohol. I think there are people that can recreationally drink alcohol, and I just know that it was such a slippery slope. And I actually I don't think I ever did coke on my own.
Really?
Genuinely. So it's so fascinating with me because there was always something that stopped me. So even if it was like I would stay until 6:55 a.m. and then get a cab home and just lay in bed like doing the luge for hours. I never got home and but it was always like I would make sure that everything was finished at that. So it was I'd still do the thing of like what someone would do going home at 4 and staying up for 3 hours on their own. I just did it in the comfort of me not thinking I was a piece of shit when I was a piece of shit. So I completely agree. I think it's just like,
would you be the person to say, let's get one more, let's carry it on? Instigator.
I couldn't. Honestly, I was like, I couldn't admit a night was over. And it would be weird because I'd be like, it's so odd because I've always had like high level anxiety and nervousness as well. So I'd know that I had something important at 10 a.m. or I knew I'd said something important at 11 a.m. And it's almost like, was it self-destruction? Was it me running away from my own problems? Was it me like not being happy in relationships? Was it me not enjoying work? I don't know. I still haven't quite figured it out.
That's the addict brain.
It was just that all the time.
Yeah. That I believe is the addict brain, because the amount of times that I would know, first and foremost, how I'm going to feel the next day. I would know that I have a business meeting the next day, but once I've made that decision, once I've had that negotiation, fuck it, I'm going to do it. I never once will play the tape forward and think about. The problem is that I think a lot of us have a huge amount of resilience. So like the amount of times I've got myself out of bed and got on with the day.
And smashed it probably.
Yeah, because you've got to. You don't have a choice. So that's how I think that we have continually kind of convinced ourselves that, I've done it before. Fuck it, let's have a line. Let's get on it. 6 o'clock in the morning, got a meeting at 10. Fuck. But
did you cancel them or did you pull through?
Varied. If I was scared of the person I was meeting, I wouldn't dare, and I would just get on with it. But I've also equally done things where I've just thought, fuck it, and I've ordered another one, and I've gone to business meetings taking drugs. I've done a full day's work taking drugs. Which for me now, the first time I did that, I was 23. So that was an issue then, to even think. It was awful. Like I remember it was a Thursday night and I had work the next day on a Friday, and I had a cold shower, got on the tube, did a line, got on the tube, had a presentation, did the presentation, and then I would just set a timer on my phone to sleep in the disabled toilet. So I'd do interval naps. But that planning, that, like
just to try and justify.
But I think back to things like that, like God, the signs were there from 23, and I caned it for another, I
was going to say, question, not to flip like podcast from podcast.
No, that's right.
How long did it take you from realizing that, not like the rock bottom, but realizing you probably should address this, to like going sober? What was your time period? Because I think mine was 5 years.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah.
5 to 7 maybe. Those two, the 5 years for sure, where I was like, not just that, other people noticed it with me. My brother particularly, would kind of be like, he brought it up to me very early on that it was, you don't do coke like other people, Hannah. The consumption, I think it's what I've learned is to do with ADHD, but I had a reputation.
Did you know you had a rep, or did you just think everyone thought you were well fun?
I think I liked to dress it up that everyone thought I was fun until I stopped being invited to certain things with friends who didn't do drugs, because I would be specifically told it's not that type of thing. I couldn't not do it.
I remember going to weddings and people were like, this is not a wedding. There was like a group of us that were like, well, we all enabled each other. I can't put the blame on myself, but we definitely all enabled each other. And I remember a couple of specific weddings that were like, these are not druggy weddings. This is not a wedding for, and everyone just fucking ignored it. And now I look back and I'm like, how disrespectful. That was
I do
really
think that.
disrespectful.
Pushing the wedding food around a plate. The last weddings I've been to for the last year and a half of my using, I was fucked the night before and then carrying on to go to that person's home.
That's a fascinating thing with coke in particular, isn't it? It's like, even when you know you've got something, take work out of the occasion. Even when I knew I had, like, I was really looking forward to going to see West Ham play away at Man United the next day, and I had to be on a coach at 8 with all my mates. I'd go to bed at like 5 and then rock up and just be like throwing up in a bag, or like, and then the only way I'd get through it would be like,
another pint, another line.
Oh, another pint, another line. And it's like...
So you would go to, even though you knew that and you'd gone to bed at 5 and you had to be at that time, you would try to get your head down and then wake back up.
I've never been a straight through crew person. But it's odd, because then the odd occasion I would do it, like even by accident, even if I'd gone to bed and hadn't slept, bizarrely I felt better the next day. The one I remember actually, which is probably compounded in when I realised everything was bad, was... another lost story, woohoo. But my 30th birthday was a really fascinating kind of culmination of everything. So my best friend at the time, Sean, who I'd lived with for many moons, had unfortunately been diagnosed with like an incurable brain tumour. So he was in a hospice, and I remember they'd let him out for my 30th. He came and surprised me and knocked on my door and took me for a shot, and we kind of hung out. And it was the last time I'd seen him. But since he'd been in the hospice, I sort of tried to like... I was at my worst. I was like probably the biggest weight I'd ever been. I was like 16, 17. So not as big, but on me it looked big. But then I felt this immense guilt that like my best friend was not going to live and was in a really bad way. So I tried to do everything I can to be there for him. But I'd also, before this, organised my own 30th birthday party, which was fucking Mike Skinner from the streets, like my idol, DJing in this like cool place in London. I'd invited loads of people. Now I look back at it, I'm like, what was I doing that for? Again, like the masked character of me. But that day, like Sean had come to knock on my door. It was my 30th birthday. I'd got to spend this like beautiful brunch with my best friend before he passed. But then that night, my cousin came over, who was in a similar cycle to me, and him and I got genuinely, and this is not me like gassing this up for a podcast because it's not fucking cool. I think we went through like 10 bags. Yeah. I stayed up all night, and then my 30th birthday party, which was meant to be like the pinnacle of my existence, or so I thought. I don't remember a fucking thing. I like stayed up all night, like managed to get through it. And then I was on like the worst come down for 2 weeks. And then like Sean passed away like 2 weeks later at like the depth of my come down. And then I had to like ring all my friends and tell them that our best mate had died. And I wanted to be there for the families. I helped organise a funeral. And that was the point where I knew it had to stop. But it took me 5 years. So that was like the rock bottom still was 5 years. And I think, but again, like I look back and it's so fucking mental. Like the night your best friend dies, I was in Ibiza. I flew back and we all went out and got so fucked up. And now I look back at it, I'm like, hang on, my best mate died through no choice of his own. And yet I'm going to go out and like do stuff to my body that could kill me. Like how fucked is that?
I mean, even had situations where I know people who have lost friends and at the funeral taking cocaine, because how else are we going to get through it? Yeah. But it's when someone dies that, you know, it hasn't been to do with drugs and alcohol. Yeah, so like they've been dealt a really fucking unfortunate set of cards. Yeah. And the guilt with stuff like that, when you come out of it, I don't know if you felt guilty at the time, But, you know, some things that I've just completely shut away.
Why do we do that? Is it guilt? Is it like the lack of not wanting to process it? Is it actually that
You're an addict.
people with our brains that are as quick as ours are, I think, sometimes in that sort of like hyper tension that you almost process it really quick, so you need to move on. Like, I'm not framing that very well, but I think you're maybe similar. My brain's like all the time. So that for me was just like, this is just gonna.
So when you took coke, did your brain go quiet? You were still animated and chatty, but were you able to focus on just one conversation?
I bizarrely coke. If I was around a kitchen table and everyone was like chatting so much shit,
you were quiet.
I was so happy just sat in silence,
listening.
Yeah.
Or just enjoying the calmness of your own brain.
A bit of I honestly couldn't tell you about the calmness of my own brain, because then when I was alone in bed, that was like the worst time ever, and it was like the most noisiness. I look back at a lot of kitchen tables, and I've got some friends who were so intense when they were fucked, and they'd be talking to me about like their dog's turtles, like dead nan, and I just never cared for that, because again, like being a functioning addict, I could sit and have a conversation with you about like what colour you're going to paint your walls, or like I've always been genuinely interested in the person opposite me rather than myself.
Yeah.
So I think people often, when they sort of hear about like my dad or Sean or my ex-girlfriend, I didn't know that. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't a trauma dumper, because I don't like hearing about you. But then some people will come at you so much. So I just remember sitting around kitchen tables just being like,
people are fucked.
I just don't care.
Yeah.
Because some people use, and I never used coke as therapy. I just used it as like.
But I want to talk to you about that, because the guy mates who I've had, and you know, I feel like, you know, men's mental health, I'm fascinated by it, because, and I'm talking majority wise here, right? Women will be able, I'm the same as you, right? I could have, and like what we're doing now, I can have honest, I don't have an issue talking to you on a sesh about something that you may think is deep, dark and emotional. I still have that conversation sober, even when I was in active addiction. Women talk to each other. You know, we have these things where we've got that connection with each other. What I've heard a lot of with interviewing people, but also men from my own life, is that when they found cocaine, it was the most incredible thing for them to be able to open up, talk about things that maybe they would never talk about.
Yeah.
And the problem is that then they would never speak about it with each other again until the following weekend, and they're back on the sesh.
Bang on. And
I think that when I was first having someone who's close to me, having this conversation with them, I really understood that. But then he basically just said to me, but in the same breath, when you first discover it, it's so incredible, because you're finally being able to talk to your mates about the stuff. But then the shame and the anxiety the next day. But I get that. Like, if you've never, as a man, had the opportunity to express yourself, but I'm just saying, if I was a man and I experienced that drug and I'd never had the opportunity to open up and be and have another person opposite me who I respect and like, and then being like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a massive reason.
It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing, and it's interesting, because I think because I was brought up with women, I've always been a little bit maybe more communicative about how I was feeling.
Yeah.
But then equally on the other side of like a big thing in my life was the secrecy, like the secrecy of my dad, the secrecy of this, the secrecy of that. So I've just always been someone that I think maybe it's just how my family's been, is like we talk about how we're feeling, but we never talked about the thing. So it's fascinating, because I would often, the only times I ever got upset about my dad or got upset about Sean, I'd be fine on like the night out, and then I might go home with an ex and then kind of get upset, because I'd be like, why would my dad choose drugs over his son? But then I'd let it all out. So I think, and if I'm being brutally honest, I think a lot of it for me was like a bit of an ego thing, where I think like I don't want people to see me being too. I could be vulnerable and I'd be the listener. So if I was somewhere and like someone was talking to me, I think I'd give really good advice. So someone would go away being like, oh, what a lovely guy. Like he's really, and I did care. Like if you came to me with a problem, I genuinely would care. But I think I've just always had a thing where it was like, oh, I just don't think anyone cares about my shit.
Yeah.
But with a lot of my male friends, to your point, like you couldn't be more spot on. And I think coke, unfortunately, has become, I guess, like a palate cleanser for men's emotions, because they think they can open up. But like you say, what that does, I think, and certainly did in my case, was like compound how you're feeling and just reinforces negative thought processes. Because I don't think you go somewhere and have a conversation with someone and sort of like discuss deep trauma, or I've had friends that have, when they're coked up, admitted that they've been victims of abuse or sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And then when I've tried to broach it with them the next day, I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about this more? Like, no, I shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah.
Internally, that must rip someone apart because you kind of shared a really raw part of yourself and then you're not allowing yourself to share it again. And that's for me, like, I actually started therapy whilst I was still using, which was really fascinating because I kept that from her. But it did heal a lot of my inner turmoil about, my dad and Sean and people's passing and secrets, and kind of gave me that self-worth. Ironically, it wasn't until I stopped using that I kind of used all the tools that she taught me. But I think therapy is something we're super vocal about on the podcast for men, because I think, I always talk about it with football. Like, football's such a weird thing with men. It's so tribal.
Just sport generally, like golf.
Just being there with someone, even if you don't know them, and you kind of share these weird, you get emotions out, tap on the shoulder, a hug when someone scores, like, yeah, good shot, mate. Like, that's how men, unfortunately, it's a good thing, but also, like, we don't communicate how we should.
But also, football is a prime example of something that, big booze, big boozing sport, big coke sport, big
Coke
pub culture.
Fucked.
Football hooliganism with cocaine and it's a well-known thing. That whole day is planned around pub at 11, and then the retaliation between the two teams, the fighting, the this, that, the other, the anger. Sometimes I see footage of after matches, like the World Cup or when they were in another country, and the way men are behaving. I find it interesting because it's like football, booze, coke is like, it's like their therapy, and then the anger at the end, because of the culmination of all three, is like, rage. It's not because you care about the other team won. Maybe you do a bit, but actually you've got like shit you're not dealing with.
I did an interview with a journalist called Ali Shuttler for Huck magazine about toxic masculinity in football, because it's really fascinating, because I've gone to football since I was 4. I've been around it. I've been, and never like in a violent sense, but I've been one of the like tribal geezers at football doing coke at 7 a.m. in the pub. But I've also always had that attachment, because I'm like, they all have their jobs. Not there's, I guess the typical kind of Venn diagram you look at is people who work trades that go to football. Yeah. It's completely their escape, and they come from, I guess, environments that maybe men don't discuss their feelings. Maybe they're having to go out and work super hard, but the culture with their work, whether they like it or not, is getting to the pub at 3 o'clock after they finish work. That often leads to load a bag. Then they've got to go home and be a dad. But then the next day the cycle's in again. And when that bleeds into football, you're right. It's almost this like, it's identity for men that I don't think feel like they have identity. So if you go to football, you'll see like it used to be Stone Island or CP, and like all these guys are saving up their money to buy these clothes to fit into an identity because they then fit in. And coke and booze is a huge through line in that. And like you say, that then spills over into anger and rage. And you're right, it's never about the fucking football.
It's very hard to get out of that. Also, if you're going into that role and you come from a broken home, it's kind of like, it's similar to gang culture. Like you feel like you've found your family. You feel like you found people that are going to protect you. It's the same with football. That kind of team spirit, culture, euphoria of like, yeah, we're all in this together. But you kind of lose the point of what you're there to support.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think there's such a through line with it, and it's difficult because like as a white man, I'm hyper aware of the privilege I've been granted in life. So I never want to kind of have these conversations and like, men need more because men have had everything since the dawn of time.
But I don't think men know their purpose. When it comes to
emotional world, and especially now, I think it's confusing. This is one of the things we spoke about in this interview, was like the purpose of it. If I was a young man now, a young man who maybe didn't know their identity, it's very easy to get pulled in because you're trying to find it. And that's why, like, unfortunately, idiots like Andrew Tate, etc., can rile up men who don't feel like they have an outlet for emotion, because I feel like they can just be like, oh, I identify with that, even though they don't really listen to what they're saying, and it's fucking dreadful. And I do think there's a lot of alcohol and coke that play, and drugs in general, but coke plays such a huge part in that tribalism of men. I think, especially when you're in addiction, we're very selfish human beings. So even if you're not trying to be a bad partner, 9 times out of 10 you fucking are. I think that like the vulnerability of men, to link it back to sobriety, the vulnerability of men often ends up around a kitchen table. It's really hard. One of my dearest friends, who I'll skirt around a little bit. One of my dearest friends, like, definitely had a lot. I still don't think he's necessarily spoken about, but I'd really try and engage in conversations when we were fucked up to like open. And some people, it's just like a stone wall. Some people start to go there and then they don't. And it's tough because I don't think I don't think drugs should be the reason. I feel very grateful now, having like done therapy and being sober, that I can sit and have this conversation 10 times over if I needed to about how I was feeling. And I'm still not great at like, you know, I was talking to my girlfriend about this the other day. Like, men just don't. If something or someone's annoying me in life, I'm not someone that rings up a mate and it's like, oh my god, this person's doing my head in. I just internalize it. Whereas a lot of my female friends have that support system where they can be like, oh my god, my partner's really pissing me off today.
Yeah.
But I don't know why that is. I just would never communicate that. I hated the kitchen tables where there was like 9 people and no one was listening to each other, and it was like top trumps of trauma, and I'm just like,
trauma bonding.
Yeah, because often, like, again, look, everyone's trauma is relative, so no one's is ever less valid than someone else's.
Did you find that hard though, right? Because you have been through quite a big thing with your dad dying of heroin overdose.
Yes.
If you were sat around a kitchen table and someone was saying something like that you would maybe class it's less, and you're like,
yeah, like daddy won't pay my phone bill anymore.
Yes.
And that was like the big drama of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe there were a couple of times I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
But again, I would stay quiet because I was just like, the perception I wanted people to have of me was that I like just cared about everyone. But internally, that's when I then go home and get upset, because whilst I'm sat listening to someone being like, oh, you know, daddy won't pay for my phone bill, whilst I sat in their fucking flat in Ballon that their parents have paid for. Like
sniffing £100 bags.
Yeah, right. And it's like, again, it's all relative. So it's not a dig at that person. But my perception of that was like, you haven't got a fucking clue. That was hard. Yeah. And I think even now, like, you know, privilege is a thing, and I totally respect anyone that's from it or had opportunity from it, because that's life, and I would give the same to my children, so it's fine. But it's when people then resent the privilege that they're given or don't acknowledge the privilege that they're given, that fucking winds me up.
So after Sean died, do you think that you ever dealt with that until you got sober? So was that your rock bottom?
No, the rock bottom was the March afterwards, where I found out my partner had cheated on me on my 30th birthday whilst they were working away at work. Okay. So that was fucking savage. Yeah. That was probably my rock bottom.
So she wasn't at the Skinner?
No. She was working away. And I did something I'm not proud of, which was like, I knew something was up, and I'd opened like a diary thing and read it, which obviously in hindsight, you know, I would never do that, but obviously I found something out.
It's tricky things like that, like, you know, people, there's a real shame around, like, you know, going through a partner's phone or this, that and the other. And I do think that if you're in the right relationship, then you won't have the urge to do that anyway. But it's kind of that gut feeling that but then you feel like you can't then talk about it to the person, because you know the way you found out is...
Yeah, it was fucked. And I think knowing what I was going through with Sean, like knowing where I was at, that really hurt a lot. But again, I did this thing for like a few months afterwards where I was like, I'm fine. Like, we're fine.
So you found out, and then...
I confronted it. I tried to make it work because I was just an idiot. I don't know. I was so fucked in my own life. But at the same time, this is what makes no sense to me sometimes. Like, I just signed the biggest client I ever signed. I was traveling the world with them, and life was seemingly from the outside good, but everything was crumbling, and my drug use was definitely worse. And then I started therapy, and that was the best thing I ever did.
What made you one day think, I'm going to start some therapy?
The brutal truth. The partner I was just talking about, when I was very upset about everything, said that I hadn't dealt with my dad's death, so I should probably get therapy, when actually I was just livid because they cheated on me. But anyway, went to therapy. Mandy, bless her. Random bit of serendipity here.
Ironic name.
Yeah, right. The serendipity of this, though, just crazy. I went on the to the BCAS website, so I was just scrolling through, right? Chose the friendliest looking face. So I didn't say anything about her. Emailed her. She called me, we had a chat. And she was like, I told her a bit about my life. She was like, oh, is that how you found me? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I'm like the UK's leading specialist in child bereavement. I was like, oh my, like genuinely at that point, I was like, okay, the universe is like, Sean's looking down at me here. Yeah. So yeah, I went and saw her, and like it was interesting. So I was still using, and like.
Now, did you hide that from her?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I was the same.
100%. But it was cool. She really, she rebuilt my self-esteem. She made me feel like I was loved. She's probably the only time I've really cried. Not uncontrollably, but like, you know, when someone tells you that you're loved and you're a good person and that you're a kind soul.
There's something about someone who's not involved in your life. Okay, so like an external person who sympathizes with you and kind of validates your emotions.
And sees you. Yeah. And it's important. there's no bullshit. You're sat in a room and like this, and they just see you, and it's like, again, a big issue in my life. I don't know if you were the same, but it was like I had to be liked by everyone. I couldn't deal with the fact I wasn't liked. So maybe there was an ego thing there of like when she said that, it was like, oh, okay, she does like me. But it wasn't that. It was more just like, I think when you're using and you've had loss, or like obviously when someone's like a partner's cheated on you, you feel like you're not good enough or that no one cares. So you kind of just compound it. So that was a beautiful 2-year period of like, or 18-month period of like working on myself, but I still didn't address my drink and drug taking. So I'd still, although I was like maybe in a better place, it still was bad.
And was there a part of you that was like, that's fine now because I'm in therapy and I'm working on myself?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I started running. Like, to be like, fuck you to my partner, I lost 3 stone.
Yeah.
I like completely went through a transformation.
The glow up.
But we ended up breaking up, obviously, because that was not healthy. But essentially then I was like, I'm free. And then what happens? Lockdown. So I'd kind of finally had this like self-realization of like, I've lost weight, I feel good in myself, I've done therapy. And then lockdown hit. And that's when it's funny because I look at it, weirdly the first 3 months is probably some of the best 3 months of my life.
Absolute heaven.
It was so good.
Sunny.
And my best friend had just broken up with his partner. And I said, come on, mate, we'll live together.
Yeah.
And
Carnage.
whilst I'm very grateful for his company, it was probably for my health and probably the worst decision we could have made because we went fucking insane. I bought a DJ setup, I bought strobe lights, I bought a rig, like 3. We had this thing called Wild Wednesdays where we would just pick up and just we'd do tacos and then stay up all night. Yeah. And it was difficult because he was not working at the time. Yeah. I still was trying to run a fucking big business remotely, but I obviously could get away with it. And it was difficult because I've always gone to bed. So we'd like party till like 5 a.m, then I'd go to sleep. But I'd wake up and he'd still be up and still be drinking. So I started to then worry about him. Long story short, when the world opened up again, I couldn't fucking deal with it. I was instantly out and everywhere, but like the idea that I'd come from my little self-secluded little place, straight back to festivals, straight back to gigs. And then that will be the June 21 when the world opened up was the last year of my drinking and drug taking because it just culminated in me being like, I can't do this anymore.
Is that sort of like because you had social anxiety?
Yeah, that, and I think, again, it's so funny because I was just such a twat in lockdown. Like, I'd like be Instagram storying our parties. Not parties of like, we didn't have people over, like, our madness. And I'm thinking like, people are losing people here. People have lost their jobs. And I was just in this like really weird, secluded little bubble of me and my mate doing like 10 bags a week. Like, DJing. Like, what? It was weird. It was like the world didn't exist. And then I just felt this like all-consuming guilt when the world opened up again. Because everyone was like, oh, look at you. I think from the outside in now, look at it, even my mates that probably are good friends would be like, that wasn't cool. And I'm not proud of it. Did you feel like, because I think for me, pre-lockdown, I was out 3 or 4 times a week. I was partying, I was working, doing my own business like you were. It was crazy. When lockdown happened, it was almost like, and now I can do the bit I love, getting fucked up, without the madness of anything.
Yeah, or worrying about having to get to a meeting
so
or get up.
It felt still and calm. And I honestly, that first month and a half was like insane. Walking in the sunshine and whatever. But then I think it was like, okay, this is real now. And then it wasn't just like calling, we ended up with a dealer from London that would buy so much gear that he'd drive out of town to drop off because we were spending,
I mean, the insane things that you do
pounds.
To get gear, I've done the similar thing, like not being able to get stuff around here sometimes and messaging drug dealers from London saying, we'll pay you to drive from London. The insanity of all of it. I mean, or how it got to with lockdowns. I had a situation with a dealer where, I wanted to obviously feel like I was being respectful of COVID. So I would then we had the system where you put it in the post box on the back of the gate. But, the sun's out, it's shining. I haven't got work. I haven't got that. People are on furlough, you've been paid. It's like, oh, fucking crack. Oh, yeah.
It's fucking insane.
And the next thing you know, one glass of wine, you talk yourself all the way back up and you're like, it all seems like a good idea again. I think lockdown was hard for lots of people.
It's funny though, because we have some people on the podcast that like lockdown was their moment of
Yes.
like sobriety, which is beautiful, and I love that. For me, it was definitely the beginning of the slippery slope, I think.
So you went back out into the world
Yeah.
after lockdown,
Yeah.
and you were back working, and that's when you noticed the coke being quite extreme. Did you notice it?
I don't know. I think my using was the same for 5 years. I
Okay.
don't think anything changed. I think that. I think my big moment. I had a new partner who.
Can we talk
partied
about
a lot? Yes.
relationships a little bit? Okay, so when you've been cheated on, because I have been cheated on every relationship I've had apart from the last one. This self-worth thing for men, I'm just very interested to know from a male's perspective on then going into another relationship. Did you find that you took the insecurities of being cheated on into that one?
Yes and no. Like I think I was a self-sabotager for all relationship prior to that. I think because of I link it back to the loss thing with like my dad in particular, that it's easier to destroy something yourself than it is to like risk losing it. So probably for like 3 or 4 relationships prior, I'd got to like a certain point and being like eject a seat button and just like, but I wasn't really confident in communicating at the time. So I probably would just like start to change my behavior and be a bit colder, or like, and eventually just be a thing like, we need to have a chat, and then it would end. And then that rocked me, that one. But it's hard to say, because I think as a man for myself, I look back at like some of those and you're like, oh fuck, was it the drink? I just, to be brutally honest, I prioritized work and I prioritized partying. And I think that was a common thread even through the relationship that, I was, the cheating thing happened, because I think that was, not that that's an excuse for it, but I just, I was in a certain zone and that was that. So coming out of it, I don't know. It's not until, to be brutally honest, the relationship I'm in now with someone who's sober, and
that's what I was going to ask you.
It's just changed my fucking life. And ultimately my sobriety ended a relationship as well, because I realised what was important for me and what I needed. And that's really fucking hard, because that's not the other person's fault at all. But ultimately, like, if you're on 2 different train tracks and they're suddenly in very different directions, that's that. I think now I'm fascinated by that, because obviously I already do naturally know that I would not even entertain pursuing at something with someone who was, even if they were just someone who was a casual drinker, right? Just if there was even the ability for it to go any which way, I don't want to feel like I also don't want to feel like I'm parenting that, or like I'm, I don't want to ever feel like a bit of a Bible basher about drink, if I'm watching something deteriorate, if I'm finding it uncomfortable. I think I just already do know in myself that if I'm next relationship, for me, there's like there is for the first time ever, a boundary of like, I think I need someone who is sober. Yeah, I think that was it for me. And I think we're really guilty in dating in general, that like alcohol is the common through line, like whether it's like first dates or like how people connect emotionally, and let's be frank, sexually a lot of the time. Like alcohol is that thing that loosens inhibitions in relationship. So actually like learning to relationship and date sober has been fascinating, because then I think like when you do have that connection, it's like it's there and it's amazing.
It's not fake.
And it's raw at times, because you can't hide from it. There's no like, oh, let's go for a few drinks and forget this. It's like, we've got to deal with it. But again, like, and look, the reality is that like 99% of people that are sober have had a journey. Yeah. So you have to be hyper aware of that. And sometimes we all bring things into new relationships that are from our past. And you've got to be hyper aware of that. But for me now, it's like, I'm so at bait. We always talk about the thing with sobriety, right? Like the worst thing to get your feelings back, the best thing to get your feelings back. I love so that. I'm at such a base level now, like me being comfortable, but like communicating is free. And I know now, it's like, I know that I am, I think, the best version of me, and I'm really proud of that. And again, in relationship, not just with a partner, like with friends, with family, like I'm showing up all the time, and I'm like, I'm not cancelling shit, and I'm not turning up to birthdays hungover, and I'm not making excuses to cancel on people. I'm just, and that's fascinating, right? So one of my friends, loose friend, like sort of through music, I saw him at a festival the first summer I went sober. And then my mate rang me on the Monday. He was like, oh, I saw so-and-so the other day. He said it was really nice to have a conversation with you when you were present. And that fucking hurt me, because I was like, I've known this guy for 10 years and he's never indicated that I wasn't. But it was fascinating that people's perception of me was like nice guy, but was always like sort of meerkatting around. And now I'm there, you know.
Do you think you're in denial? Because at the start of the interview, you were like, it took me until, sort of doing the podcast to realise you're an addict.
Yeah.
Do you think you just needed to maybe take a break?
Yeah, and I just thought that because I'd come from I think for me in life, it was always moving forward, again, I'm very grateful for the life my mum provided me, and I had a roof over my head and food, but, it was just her and we didn't have a huge amount. So for me, it was about, I think, proving to myself always that I could do better, or I could build something, or I could do something. So I think when I was in active drinking and doing coke all the time, it was all about perception. I couldn't let anyone see any weakness, even myself. So even when I'd be laying in bed this is fucked up, you summed it up perfectly earlier. You'd always just give yourself a reason.
I also think though, because I also think that you to yourself, there's a point to prove. That's probably why you never continued as in straight through crew, because there's what you had built for yourself from such a young age, but also proving to yourself that you were never going to let it go. You said at the start, you're never going to let it go that far or too far over the edge.
But that's the irony. What is too far? Because I definitely had horrifically suicidal thoughts at 5 a.m. I've definitely considered dumb shit, and I've definitely destroyed a lot of my self-esteem and even financial security at times in it. So that's too far. But again, it's nearly not the mic. We justify it to ourselves because, like you say, but we're only ever one drink or one line away from losing everything, and that's what I've come to learn from that. Is I could have done one more dumb thing, and it could have all been over.
It's definitely a big one for me most recently in my sobriety that's hitting me quite hard is how lucky I am to be alive. Genuinely, the situations I've been in, I've put myself in, the amount of drugs I've done, a cocktail of drugs over days, festivals. I mean, we've only really spoken about cocaine today, but I'm sure you've done others.
Yeah, it was interesting for me. Coke was definitely the fucking the headline
of the show.
The others would play a minimal part, to be honest. In my early 20s, MDMA and pills at festivals, but that never agreed with me. It always made me sick. The irony is Coke gave me nosebleeds all the time, and that didn't fucking stop me. But there was something about the idea of being sick I didn't like too much.
It's your body's revolting it.
Yeah, and then occasionally, Ket might float in once or twice a year, but honestly, it was cocaine was the fucking just the thing.
So I've recently started to, I don't know if you're the same, but when you first go sober, you go on such a journey of self-discovery, and then also how you feel about the drug or the drugs and the substance. And I think the place I'm at now is you unlock life when you get sober, right? Do you feel like that?
Oh,
I've got the key.
It's the analogy I use, it's so over dramatic, but it's honestly you see those old movies where it goes from black and white to colour. That's how I feel now. I feel like I've got an extra day in the week, an extra week in the month, and I feel like I've put on the most beautiful glasses and everything is just there. And it's crazy because there's not, I was having this conversation, funnily enough, someone called me on the way here that I loosely work with, and he was like, I haven't drunk in 3 months. He's like, I sort of saw what you were doing, blah, blah, blah. I was like, how is it? He was like, yeah, I just, everything just feels better. And I was like, well, that's it. There's not one downside other than some people naturally just step away from you, but are they people that you want in your life anyway?
So the biggest question I tend to get asked on TikTok is, do you lose friends? Have you lost friends?
No. How do I frame this in the right way? No, I don't think I've lost friends. I think I've lost acquaintances, but I think I've lost acquaintances that if I was to still see them out and about, I'll go for a zero with them and it'll be a nice time. Definitely the people that, maybe we spoke about earlier on, the surface relationship people. Yeah, sure, they've gone. But I like them still. I've still got friends that go out and get fucked up 4 times a week. I still love them dearly. I just know what my ejector seat is now. I still try and see everyone as much as I can. I still will be there for people if they need me. I'll still always show up to people's birthday parties. I'll just leave at 10 o'clock. Still go to everyone's wedding. I'll just leave at 10 o'clock. I saw your thing the other day about like leaving the wedding at 8:30. Like that's my
I can't do the dancing thing
coping
yet.
mechanism.
Can't do the dancing thing.
Do you know what's fascinating for me? Like dancing has become like a therapy for me in sobriety.
I've heard that from other people, but I think it just did it take you time?
Yeah, it was odd. It only really happened. This is going to sound like the most fucking wanky millennial thing to say, but I was at Reading recently and Fred again played, and I had I actually had an anxiety attack in the day, which I haven't ever had before, even in my drinking. Right, I was in a crowd watching Ray, and it was really cool. And then all of a sudden, there was like some drunk guy around me. Some guy behind me was like, she was talking about something really like deep and personal. And he was like, "Shut up, bitch, play the song." And I was just like, "Ah."
Yeah.
So I left, and I was like, "Oh, I don't like this." And then went to watch Fred again. And I just closed my eyes and I just like danced for an hour, and I just felt almost like high, like I was on drugs.
Yeah.
That was really interesting because I hadn't had that moment in sobriety. But for me, dancing's always been, so it sounds like I do ballet. But I've just always enjoyed it. Rhythm's always been something that, like, 'cause obviously I just love music. But yeah, it's been a real, like, that's been quite fascinating in sobriety.
Did you find it hard? Obviously, you're obsessed with music. Music can sometimes could be quite relatable to like what we sesh to. Did you have to stop listening to certain music? Did it remind you of certain occasions and things?
My biggest clients are drum and bass.
Yeah.
So I was, from the minute I went sober, was like at festivals, which is fascinating because like that was hard. But I give a lot of thanks on my journey to one of my clients who's a big DJ. Who went sober 4 months before me and planted that seed. Okay. Funnily enough, they now drink again, not in like a session way, but they've kind of got to the relationship of like,
they've reintroduced
3 years and they can have a few beers. That will never be me, but I respect that for them. But him doing it kind of gave me the thought process of like, oh, if he can, like maybe I can. So we together very early on was like, right, zeros on the rider, whatever. So it was odd. Ironically, in my depths of addiction, I fell out of love with music. I didn't love it. Whereas in sobriety, I've fallen in love with music again because I'm hearing it differently and I'm seeing it differently. So it's been fascinating going to events because like you're there and obviously sometimes you're the only sober person, but I just drive now. And even if I had a gig a few weeks ago, my arch wasn't until 2 a.m. So I'd left at 3 in the morning. I was the only person that venue that could see, let alone speak. But it was funny because I was coming over the A40 back towards home out of London, and one of my memories of like, one of the darkest memories I've had on drugs was I was getting really fucked up at a friend's house one night in Camden. Got a taxi home and it was just after Grenfell, and I remember coming up over the A40 as the sun was rising and the smoke was still coming up from the tower like 3 days later or 2 days later. And I remember like basically being in the back of the car like coats off my nut like, ooh. So then I had this really weird beautiful moment of like coming back over that at the same time of day as the sun was rising sober. And that was the most like, in my sobriety, probably the most like, holy fucking shit, I've done it moment. Because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever that was, or 5 maybe even, Christ, but I'd had like such a fucking, you know what it's like when something just like, a moment. So that was really interesting. Music's been fascinating because like, obviously like.
Do you feel like who you like talent spot now is different because you're sober?
Oh, it's so fascinating. Almost in the reverse. Like I've had a client recently signed to me because I was sober, and they're like young. They're like 24, and they're awesome, and they still drink and do whatever. But they were like, "Oh, it's so appealing to me that you're sober because like you've got your shit together." And it's fascinating because I never really thought about that because I think I was always, touch wood, I think, did a good job when I was still fucked up. But even from my work has become. I was so much more efficient. I'm so much more on it. I think one of my big issues in life when I was partying was I would always find a reason to delay having the important conversation. So if something bad had happened, I'd be like, oh, I'll wait for this thing to happen to tell them. And that bites you in the arse in personal life and professional. Whereas now if something bad happens, I'm like, yo, shit's hit the fan. And it might be a difficult 20-minute convo, but you're dealing with it. And that's the beautiful thing for me in sobriety is like life, love, work, whatever, like, you just deal with it in the moment and it's done and you can move on.
How did you get sober?
So my friend who moved in with me in lockdown had a very tough start to 2022. So he lost his father and his girlfriend. He lost his girlfriend. They broke up in quite a short period of time. Ironically, when his father died, what was the first thing we did? Like had an absolute gargantuan sesh. So then that was in like the Jan or the Feb, and then I think both of us had a really mad next 4 months doing the same sort of thing, and then it came to the Queen's Jubilee weekend, you know, the pinnacle of the sesh calendar.
When you must sesh.
When you must. But it was like, there was a festival called Slam Dunk on in London. One of my friends was playing a massive show. I had one of my DJs was playing a big show, and my mate decided to throw a house party 4 days back to back. And I did all 4, and it got to the Sunday afternoon at the festival, and I wasn't even that fucked up. I just remember being like, this is it. I can't do this anymore. And I remember looking at my friend, and he used to probably take it 30% further than I would, which I think I've really started to notice his anxiety, his like self-worth, his just like way of being. I could see it. It's hard to sort of put yourself on any pedestals of it, but I felt like he was in a worse state than I was, and I knew how bad I was. And I can't remember who instigated it, but I remember the next morning, we'd kind of both gone home. We hadn't gone to the after party. We'd both stopped drinking at like 7, gone home. And I remember one of us speaking to the other one, and together we were like, we're going to do a month. And then in that moment, I think for whatever reason, within a week, I was like, this is it forever. I think even though I probably hadn't felt the physical or the mental benefits really yet, because we know, you know, scientifically it takes 6 weeks to sort of undo a lot of that work. Within the first week, I think, and that sounds so fucking OTT, but it was almost like some kind of awakening in my brain. And he was the same. And within a month, we were like, holy shit. And then so we both, it's beautiful, we both got the same sobriety date, 5th of June, 2022. And both of us, I mean, he's now like built an incredible PT business. The geezer's more ripped than you could ever imagine. But he's doing so well. And I feel like I've done great as well. And that was it. Like, I didn't even, I read Alan Carr's Stop Drinking Now, which was a fucking hard read because it's so like fucking blunt, but that helped. I feel really grateful. Like I didn't need, I'm super intrigued by AA and I think it's incredible. I didn't need to go.
My biggest point is to get people on who have different sobriety stories. Like, I don't care how anyone gets sober. If you want to get sober, and you know, as long as you get like whatever.
Yeah, I didn't need to go. Maybe I didn't feel I needed to go, but yeah, I managed to go a month. But it was there was something in me that was just like, fucking stop, do it now. And I always had that thing of like, you know, what would Sean want, or like what would my dad want? What would, subconsciously there, so I was just like, yeah, let's fucking do it.
And do you think, like, obviously you set it as a month, so in your head it was like, it's just, and then it just grew and grew and grew?
Yeah, I think it was funny. I think we said a month, and within like a week I was like, I'm forever. Whereas Tom, who I did the podcast with, he was 100 days and he still didn't feel good at the end of the 100, so like he extended it, and it took him a long time. I was like pink cloud wanker after a week. I actually came up with the idea for They Think It's All Sober 2 weeks into my sobriety. We didn't put the first episode out until I was a year in, because I was like, I needed to like,
I felt a bit like that.
You know, we recorded the first stuff like 8 months in, 9 months in, and obviously like I actually now regret the decision. I wish I'd done it week 1, but I think it was, what I love about what you've done is like, you've been very open about your journey online, and that's kind of led you to this, whereas we reversed it. I obviously spoke about my sobriety openly on my Instagram, but I've never really wanted to. It's so odd for me with my job, obviously, because I'm like the manager, the label owner, the business guy. It was life-changing, and people could see it in me. They could see the light in my eyes. They could see like the passion I had for life. They could see how much I cared about work. And I think once I started to see the results and like felt better in myself, what dumb time for someone who works in music to go sober, like the start of fucking festival season. A week in, I was at Download Festival. 2 weeks later, I was MC at one of my best friend's weddings. 3 weeks later, I had another festival. 4 weeks later, I had another festival. Then I was in like Croatia touring. I had Reading and Leeds Festival, which was like, Reading for me, because it's quite local to me, was like the pinnacle of the summer. For 15 years, that's where I got off my nut. So that was like, returning to the scene of the crime. But I said to myself, I'm going to do every single thing this summer that I would have done off my nut sober. And once I got through that, it was like...
I think there's a lot to be said sometimes for throwing yourself in at the deep end. And like the thing is with sobriety is it's got to be a bridge to normal living. Yeah, you can't just be... What's the point in getting sober if it's not going to unlock the best parts of life? I think that's quite a rare scenario, to be able to go straight back into all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think...
Well, there's so much association there with it.
It was odd. I think I'd had a mask for so long that ironically in the sobriety, like there was a new mask, but it was like removing it and it was just me again.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I think I've always been me, and I think at the core of me has always been like someone who is kind and means for the best. I just sometimes made some really stupid decisions when I was fucked up. So I think now with that, it was like, right, I'm sober, this is me now, and I'm gonna just push myself to do it. I totally respect that some people can't, and I totally respect that some people need to shed their skin, so to speak, and start fresh and maybe step away from some scenarios. But I wasn't gonna lose the job that I loved more than anything. I knew that I would be better at it. I didn't need to step away from it. And, you know, it's easy football's been interesting because that's my escape from work, right? And there I go with a lot of people that are like the gentleman we spoke about earlier that are like, fucking hell, Jay, like, and someone said 2 months into my sobriety to start the football season, someone, Jay, I bet you 100 quid you'll fucking do coke before the end of the season. Because they cannot compute it. Still owes me 100 quid if he's listening, by the way. But like that was fascinating for me because they just couldn't get their head around that concept. And that's been they're the one people now that when I go to football, they're like, Jake, still sober? I'm like, yes, nearly 2.5 years in.
People do ask me that, like about, I think like lads will ask me things like, I'm just trying to think whilst you're here, like to think about that. It's like they take the piss out of me for having a 0%, things like that. Or I can't get away from it because all my friends do it. I think that you have to figure out to yourself what is a friend to you, okay? Because we've all had these associations with people, but they are just one-dimensional. Like, is all you do with that friend take drugs, go to events, go drinking? Is that friend prepared to sit you down and tell you things where you're getting things not right in your life? Is he going to praise you when you're doing really well at something?
Yeah, are they going to tell you to, at 5 p.m. after the football, to go home to your wife and 2 children? Or are they going to encourage you to get another bag in and get fucked up?
Yeah.
I don't have children, but I see it so much with the football culture of people fucking up their relationships with their partners and their kids because they just choose, they just, some nights they just won't go home. You know, football matches from 3 till 5 on the most part. And then just go home at 2, 3 in the morning off their nut or have missed a family dinner or whatever. And like, I don't know. Again, as someone who never grew up with a dad, I would hate for that to be my perception of being a father. You know.
The other thing is that when I was in my last relationship, for example, and you know, I think 30, we have this like societal value of 30, like, oh my God, I need to be at this, you know, have everything sorted. And I was going to weddings and things, and that group, you know, they were doing drugs at that, you know, the bride or the groom, and I'm thinking like, this isn't what I want. Like when I get to that age, although I already was, I was like, I don't want that. And I remember having a conversation with my ex, and he was like, well, we're me and you, I mean, it's bound to happen. And it was like these little receptors being like, I don't want that though. Yeah. Or like they would go off for a boys weekend, they got kids, and I'd be like, come back and tell me stories, and I'd be like, I don't see that for myself if I have children. And
it's not like ha funny, it's like ha like
but the fact that the person I was with was saying well, you know, that's just normal. Oh, he was only away for a weekend. I'm like, but he's got 2 children. Like, I don't want to go in. Do you know what I mean? And I think
100%. Your values.
Yes.
That's the thing. I think for me, I've always had or tried to have similar values, even when I was in it. When I was partying, you know. But it's fascinating you say that as well, because I think there's I don't know, you know it with some people it just suits them, right? But I remember being at parties when I was like 28, 29, which in my head is still way too old to be behaving like I was, but there'd be people there that were like 36, 37 that were like still bang on it. And I remember thinking like, I don't want to be like that at that age. And then when it got to like 33 and I was still like it, and some of the people I was hanging out with were like 26, 27, and I was like, oh, fuck. And again, I didn't think about it at the time, but the subconscious thing of like, I've become the person that I didn't want to be at these parties. Yeah. That's like, shit.
The last sort of like music thing I went to was with my best friend. We went to Fabric, and we were standing outside the smoking area, and these 2 girls came over to us, and we were having a fag, and she just looked at us and she was like, how old are you guys? And we were like, we're 30. And she was like, what? And I was such a moment, and I was like, she was like, oh, you don't look 30. I was like, well, that's good. And she was like, but I'm really surprised that you guys are like, oh my God, it's so cool. Like, so cool that you're at Fabric at 30. I was like, oh my God, it's happened. It's happened.
Yeah.
And I actually think to myself, yeah, but when I was 25 and I met a 30-year-old at rave, I feel like, oh, that's great. Yeah, it's just a bit old to be
I
there.
saw an Instagram the other day that was asking 18-year-olds what's old.
I saw it.
How offensive was that?
It
I
was
was born
like-
in 1988.
So
Imagine how I felt.
Someone said 2004. I was like,
They
what?
were like, anyone born in the 90s or the early 2000s is old. I was like, you're saying that someone who was born after 9/11
I
is
know.
the boundary of young. I was like, oh my God.
I think, though, I've got this real thing about the fact that I did my first line at 20 and I got sober at 30. I quite like
decade
that.
under the influence.
Yeah, and then I always say jokingly, I'm like, and I'll be straight back on it at 70. Do you know what I mean? Straight back in the set.
But that's you know, I think what you're doing is important, and hopefully if people listen to ours, they get the same vibe. It's like we should be able to make this fun and like
100%.
normalize a conversation. Because again, when I quit, and it wasn't even that long ago, but I just felt like so many of the conversations and so many of the podcasts was either like, get up at 5 a.m. and have a nice bath and like, oh, you're a piece of shit, or just like, well, what you should do is, and I was just like, fuck me, like sobriety is the funnest thing you will ever do.
You literally unlock your life.
Don't make it unfun.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And also, you don't have to go and get an endorphin from going on a run at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
You can actually get an endorphin from waking up and listening to the birds and it not being drug induced. Do you know what I mean?
Oh my God. Like, even now, if I hear birds at like, so ironically, I was one of those wankers getting up for a run in the summer, but I'd hear the birds, and it's still to this day, there's only one noise that can take me back to like pure anxiety, and it's like 6 a.m. birds. Because you'd be at a party in a room like this, right? And you start to see this creeping through.
It's just the worst.
And that would be like, oh, I fucked it.
I've done things like tape
Oh,
lines,
100%.
you know, like so you don't realise night to day.
Yeah, which is funny because if you'd asked me that when I was like in my teenage years, I would have called that a crack den.
So would I.
And it's like, I wasn't in a crack den, I was in Fulham.
Yeah, I was like Fulham, but we still gaffer tape the blind to the wall.
Yeah, it's so fucking true.
Right, I have to ask this. Obviously, in your line of work, I feel like I need to ask the craziest story that you can tell.
Craziest story that I can tell? Oh my fucking God, that's going to take me a minute.
Not necessarily yours, but just from being in the music industry or one you've heard.
Very early on in my career, I had a band, and there's an energy drink I won't name, but it's not the one with wings. It's very popular.
Got it.
And they'd thrown this huge party down in Newquay, and we'd all gone down there. It's like one of these artists, and they're throwing like this big party. They put us up in this house. Gone out, got fucked up as you would in
Naturally.
Newquay. Everyone's off their nut. Loads of my friends are driven down. We're all having a mad one. We're like, right, fuck it, we'll go back to the house. Unbeknownst to us, one of the other guys we were with had gone back to the house before because he was too fucked and passed out. But he'd turned the gas on in the house and fallen asleep cooking a toasty. So we open this front door. Everyone's like, fuck. My friend sparks a cigarette as we walk into the front door of the house. Just the most overwhelming smell of gas. And literally someone just like pushed them out the front door. And then the whole house is, you know that thing where it like just about catches but doesn't quite? Just and from that, I always had this moment of like, it wasn't even like too much of a sesh story. It was just like, we were literally...
How quickly did you sober up?
Oh, instantly.
Yeah.
Instantly. I mean, I've had some horror, like if we want horrible experiences, like I've been there when one of my friends actually had gone sober, but on his stag do decided he was going to take drugs, but not drink.
Okay.
So was drinking Red Bull all night, the other energy drink, and doing a lot of drugs, and just dropped down in front of us and had like a seizure. And luckily one of our friends we were with was like an army trained paramedic and basically saved his life. And it was horrible because actually, like, to put a dark end to that one, it was crazy because at that moment you go into fight or flight, and we were all so fucking fucked up that if our friend hadn't been there, I genuinely don't know what would happen because you were petrified. And I'm really embarrassed to say, but I went into like flight mode. I just remember sitting there thinking like, he's going to die.
But also, I've been in a similar situation where I've been at an afters, and this guy went into a K-hole, and it was, you know, we're all chatting, buzz, and I'm not joking, you could have heard a pin drop, and everyone's watching him, no one's knowing what to do. Selfishly, I'm thinking, I kind of need to get out of here because if they call people here, I'm fucked. Yeah. This whole place is covered in drugs and alcohol, and it's so bizarre, the power of the brain on how quickly you can be in a deep, meaningful conversation, fucked with your face, to then, I'm sober and I need to get out of here. Yeah. I've had other situations with things like the brain. I find so fascinating. Like me and you could be at a festival, we both drop the same amount of pills or whatever, and you come up like a motherfucker and I don't. But that's because prior to doing it, I'm like, I just don't feel like it's working. It's not working. it doesn't matter. We can take exactly the same pill, and you haven't even thought about the fact it's not going to work. I am. Next thing, like, it's fascinating.
Was your brain? I feel like maybe you and I are quite similar with this. Like, did you struggle with like shutting off about like work and stuff? Because I just would. Even now in my sobriety, I'll wake up at 4 a.m. and be like, oh, I've got to sort that visa out. But when I was partying, I just always constantly was in this loop of like thinking about work.
Mine would be when, like we're saying, the ceiling duty thing, like the busyness of my brain with that. But I then met benzos, so I don't know if you ever.
No.
Diazepam for me was this, like, I just thought my life was made when I found diazepam because it would knock me out. But subsequently, same thing. You build up a tolerance. Next thing I know, I haven't woken up for like 3 days, and then I don't remember anything that's happened.
I was petrified of downers. I've never smoked weed.
Yeah, it's
I was
funny.
It's like I don't know whether it was because of maybe it was a subconscious thing with my dad about the idea of like taking too much, something that you pass out and never wake up. But I just never ever in my life. Even I rarely take paracetamol or ibuprofen.
That's a common thing that I've noticed with my guests. They've got a real thing about putting ibuprofen or paracetamol. Like they won't have that
in sobriety or just in general.
Generally,
because mine,
but never afraid of doing.
Yeah, how dumb's that? Like that's probably just passed through like fucking all these poor people in Peru and then all the way to us and being like put with rat poison.
Yeah,
you're so fucking dumb.
Were you ever been in a situation where you were around harder drugs?
I've
just thinking with your dad, like.
Well, funnily, there's a story I now know, which was like when I was 3, I think, and I think the reason that my parents actually broke up was that I think my nan was looking after me, found me going through one of my dad's drawers and found some like hypodermic needles and stuff, which is now I think about it like fucking insane. But I've had a couple of friends who have accidentally done lines of heroin because they thought it was something else. But I've never, again, like I never really. It's so weird. I partied all the time. But it was quite like one-dimensional. It was like the same people, same 10 places. So I never really ended up in some pretty fucking rough places, but never, again, like when I went to those places, I'd be like, don't like this, I'm going to go. Even if I was chasing
Me too.
Feel quite lucky that my self-awareness has always been like, I'd never be the one that would end up in the back of a car with strangers going to some random gaff. Like, I'd go to a random gaff, but it would be like, I'd trust the people I was with. Yeah, never like, I ended up in some fucking crack den in Peckham or whatever. Whereas I've got a lot of friends who, and one of my relatives I'm still very close to, who's sober now as well.
Is that your cousin by any chance?
Yes.
I was going to say, because I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
Because that experience you had when Sean died.
Yeah.
And then you had that massive session together.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, actually, about your cousin.
Yeah, it's fascinating because he's like we say cousin, he's like a third cousin, but we met through football. Very different lives. He grew up sort of in Essex and then in Kent, joined the army at 18 and had a really rough time in the army. It was like in Afghanistan, and I think from that came back, and obviously it's his story to tell, so I won't tell it, but that led him onto a very different path to what I was on, right? But we kind of met in the middle, and that was like, we both loved going to West Ham, and we just connected and love each other deeply. But again, he definitely, around the same time I was struggling, was really struggling, and he decided to go sober about 4 months before me, 5 months before me. And again, a big inspiration, because that was a guy that, again, I would say was like 3 up on the Richter scale from me, and I'd seen it destroy his life. But now he's, gets married next June, his first kid's due in a month, like he's got a very successful business and he's doing great, and he's a larger than life character, and he's a proper fucking East End geezer, and he's worn sobriety. He's like the one at football. He's like, fucking, let's fucking have it. But he's sober and people are fascinated by him. I've always been the like weird, quirky, creative one with weird clothes that goes to football that doesn't wear Stone Island or CP. But he's just like the geezer. But it's brought us closer together, because even when we've had friends that have then started and stopped or like tried and gone back to it, him and I have just always stayed really like close in that. But the family thing's interesting, because like my aunt, who I referenced at the beginning, like her and I partied together for years and years. Like she's 17 years older than me, so there's always been an age gap, but close enough that we've really got on. But that was I loved partying with her. We had a really good dynamic, and we would party. Like we would really party.
How did your mum find that?
Maybe weird, I don't know, but I was maybe safe because I was with her, right? It's interesting. my family's tiny, but super. There's 3 sisters. They're all super tight. I'm still super close to my nan. So I think it was like a unspoken thing. But I think, again, they got to a point with my mum where I was honest about like what I was doing, because I felt like my life was based around secrets, and I didn't want to. Like, that's been a beautiful thing in my sobriety, and almost having a podcast and having conversations like this is like, if I'm going to be an advocate for people to recover, I think we all need to be advocates for like just telling our truth, because people are only going to not be inspired by it. I don't want to be like, oh, it's so inspiring, but like people are only going to relate to stuff if you tell the full truth. We've had a couple of guests on the podcast who will remain nameless in this forum, but I can tell they're holding back. And then actually it's like afterwards they've been like, oh, I don't want to talk about drugs because it's not good for my platform. And it was a real bit of an evaluation thing for us, because obviously early on you try and get people on that you thought would help build the platform. But actually what we found is like, I don't give a fuck how many followers someone's got if the conversation's authentic, because it's just like, it doesn't matter.
So my biggest thing was, for me as a 30-year-old female, I was finding I couldn't see anyone my age that was talking openly about drugs. And I understand why, because people have careers and they've got parents and everything else. But because I'd run my business into the ground, I was not working. I'd moved back home. My parents knew. I mean, they knew that I was an addict and I was in AA and CA. When I started the TikTok, I was documenting taking ADHD medication for the first time and making a diary out of that. And then I kind of felt like this, you know, like we say, these pulls to do these things, you know. And I was like, I get comments being like, why are you giving advice when you're only, you know, 20 days sober or blah, 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 whatever. And I was like, well, I would love to have seen someone in real time recovery. And also being openly talk about, there's a lot of women that do a lot of drugs. And I just felt that it wasn't being discussed. And my whole idea about Class A people was that it was going to be regular people that were prepared to speak rigorously, honestly. Some people were messaging me like, I was okay for you because you talk about it publicly. I'm like, no, but I chose to do that. You know, I didn't have a job and I told my parents, but like in the back of my mind, I'm like, but if this doesn't take off in any way, I've told 35,000 people that I'm a drug addict.
And also it's like, you know, I haven't lent into like front facing TikTok stuff, but like people are brutal. So it's not just like you're opening yourself up for your life and your journey, but you're also opening yourself up to like get a lot of shit. And I've got friends that do TikTok for a living, and like it's hard. Like, and I respect the resilience of it, because you must maybe you don't, but I would assume that you get a lot of fucking trolly comments, and you just have to be like,
I'm waiting for it, and it's an anxiety for me because I haven't really had it on a big level yet.
That's good though.
But as it's growing, I'm noticing that the odd thing come in. But what I find fascinating is that my relationship with social media and how different it is from when I was in active addiction. Like, I am completely savage when it comes to blocking. I've had the same rule from day dot. I never, ever retaliate to any, even if it gets me. Yeah, like, of course, people can read you. You're there to be seen. And some people do, and they are ruthless. But I never, and I noticed this with other sobriety accounts, where then the problem is that you create, the whole page then becomes about you getting upset about someone putting on, let's get the packet in. I mean, when I go live, it's fucking mental. You know, because I go on, I call it Friday Sesh, and I go on a Friday or a Saturday night. And people would be saying that I'm doing lines of coke whilst watching this, and I want everyone to be included in it.
But that's that in its very self is the nature of why it's important that you do what you do, because that's a seed that's planted with someone. If I was doing lines of coke and someone was talking about sobriety, I probably would have subconsciously registered that, and at some point gone, okay, maybe that.
Why am I interested in this? Yeah.
Because why are you interested in that? And also, our phones aren't dumb. Like, they start to learn your behaviours and whatnot. So even now, like, I'll get suggested stuff I haven't really thought about, and then I'll be like, maybe I do like
the amount of times I get DMs being like, you keep coming up on my FYP, I'm a silent watcher and I don't follow you because I don't want people to know that I'm following it. And I'm like, there's a reason. And I think being addicts, we're very empathetic people. It's a common thread with all of us. And so I do want to be there for people. But if I tell you to go to an AA meeting and you go, let's say you're female, and there's a man there who is preying on vulnerable women, this does happen in the fellowship programs, something happens to you, and then you blame me because I told you. It's all done with good taste, but it can go very wrong. My way doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. But I come back to the same point all the time, is that you don't become an excessive drug and drink taker just because you're good at taking drugs and drinking.
Yeah.
There is a why, and people always say to me, yeah, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, but you're never going to know what that is if you're still flooding yourself with thing that's numbing you from working this stuff out. Like the revelations I'm still having 6 months in, you're probably still you're probably the same.
Oh, honestly, daily.
Yeah, it's like it's sobriety. Dropping the substances is the first thing. The inner work, that's the work.
That's what I was going to say, because I've had so many people that I know that, you know, stop drinking for a month because they think it's the right thing to do for their partner, or because they think it's the right thing to do for their kids. And the reality is that that's not going to get you there. Like, fair play to you if you can stop for a month and you can reevaluate a little bit, but like the ultimate thing is like it's selfish, but in a good selfish way. You have to do it for you and for you only, and then if the repercussions of that are better family life, better relationship, better career, whatever, great, that's amazing, but it has to be for you, because otherwise you don't want to be sober. That's the reality.
And you don't get resentful of the people who are forcing you to do it. We can both be the first to say that when we first started taking drinks, they were fun, they were great, they served a purpose, because we didn't have this inner dialogue that, oh God, maybe this is a bit of a problem. As soon as you have that reverse situation of, I don't think I should be doing this, that's when your come downs get 10 times worse. That's when you get guilty for taking it. That's when do you know what I mean? It switches.
So true.
And that doesn't mean that your usage has changed. So it doesn't mean you suddenly start doing drugs every day. You know, you could still be a weekend binge user. Nothing's changed in how you're using, but you know that there's a switch there. The guilt, should I do it? Should I not? You know, that is just as much of a sign of you addressing it than, but I didn't take more grams this weekend than I did last weekend. Yeah. You know?
Honestly, the binge drinking thing's so fascinating, because I would have put myself in that framework when I was drinking. I'm just a binge drinker. And then when you zoom out of it, you're like, that was fucked up. Yeah. 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Do you think that you've dealt with now? I've got this thing at the moment where I feel that alcohol and drugs are not the problem. The problem is how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you using those drugs and drink for? Escape, confidence, a painkiller, forgetting, remembering, reminiscing, all of these things that they can do to different people in different moments with a different type of drug. The one you connect with is the one that offers something that you're lacking, you know, or you're trying to numb. Do you feel that through going sober, you have addressed things like happiness?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think my own self-worth and my own like value to the world is something I think will always struggle with.
Yeah.
That gets better the more secure you are in yourself. And it's funny actually, because I talk about this with our psychotherapist David quite a lot, about like the idea of codependency, because now I'm in a really happy relationship, and it's given me so much I didn't know existed. I'm always like, I don't want to come across as codependent. And he's like, no, actually, like a human being can be healing for you. So I guess to answer your question, like, yeah, definitely with the loss and the grief, I'm really good with that now. And I still see Sean's parents all the time, and I still like everything I do in life will always be like, in essence, for him, because I think he deserves that. My dad's a fascinating one, because I think I dealt with that genuinely quite young in terms of like him being gone. I think the drug thing will just always fascinate me, and I think it's why I've always never really looked down on addiction, even before I was in it. Like I just understood, I think, or tried to that. But in terms of him being there, I mean, that whole side of the family is gone now. There's nobody left, so that's something I think I'm still processing in a way, which is like, okay, that's vanished. But in terms of like myself and dealing with everything, I think like accepting love from all angles has probably been the thing in sobriety that's made me calm down. But I think I'll always have like, am I good enough? But I think that's just something in my industry as well. Like it's always going to be there. But I feel like I'd say in terms of my like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and like self-actualization, I'm getting there.
Recently got sent that by my therapist.
There you go.
Yeah, and along with a feelings wheel.
Yeah, nice. In sobriety, what's your get out of jail or exit strategy if you're in a conversation you don't like?
Where's the toilet?
Every time. People must be like, that guy's got serious bladder issues. Because I'll be at a wedding and I'll literally be like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. Yeah. And off I go, and then I'll never come back. Remember back in a minute, and then I'm just like, woo.
I was at my first party thing I went to 2 weeks ago in London. It was my cousin's engagement. He's 28. So on her side, 28, lots of young people, all my family. And I must have gone from that end of the outside area all the way around to that one. And within the going round, I'd asked 3 people whether they want to come in and gone back. And I was thinking, these people they're going to slowly start talking to each other and know.
You're like, she
No,
doing gear again.
Then I get the paranoia of people thinking I'm doing gear again. I do get that. I think it's really important for me, I always have to have my car. I tried way too early on to go to my brother's birthday in London, getting into used to my natural brain, my ADHD. I had no interest in it because I just saw it as a trend, and I really struggled to sympathise with the symptoms. I don't really love the word self-medicating for myself because I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I knew as an addict. But through this journey, I have realised I was more susceptible to it because of the lack of dopamine that I have.
Yeah.
But also this connection thing that cocaine gives you, I sometimes wouldn't have that with all people because I'm a lot, or people would be like, I wouldn't connect with all people, whereas I felt when I was on cocaine, I could do that. And when I had a friend to say recently, similarly to you, she's always said, I've got a bit of ADHD, and she relates to some of the things, like the funny things, like, I don't know, the other day I came in, I turned this house upside down looking for my keys. They were in the front of the door. I leave windows open. Small things like that, yeah. And she was with me for 3 days, and she just said, it has been the most eye-opening experience. And I spend a lot of time on my own now that I'm sober, which I'm, for the first time ever, really enjoying. I'm so used to my chaos that I think when someone's around it for a long period of time, and I actually found myself, looking up at her, and I could see her watching me. And I asked her, I was like, what? She was like, it's fascinating because you were going to export that video, but now you've just done 7 other things. I counted them. And it's actually tiring to watch. And for me, it's just it's life. That's life for me. Medication for me has definitely helped, I think. But I personally think anyone who has any spectrum of neurodiversity that they think they have, sobriety will be your biggest change in your life. Like if you already have an overactive brain, you don't need to add fuel to that fire.
So I'm quite like I've got my quirks of like how I keep myself calm. But for me, it's motion. Motion. If I'm moving, I'm good. If I'm sat down, I'm watching a movie, that's tough.
That film has to get me straight in. Like someone's got to be shot dead, dying of cancer, crying their eyes out. Otherwise, if it's just like, it's a slow burner, I'm like, see you later. Do you know what I mean? I'm not there for that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've never really been like a TV watcher. My partner is, so that's been interesting because I've actually learned to like chill a little bit in that sense. But I don't know, I think I've always been super interestingly brained.
I think I have days where I know that I'm being very manic. I recognise it in myself, but I try not to. I don't know. I let myself be now, and I don't do tons of research into ADHD. I don't want to. I know I have it. I've been diagnosed by 2 psychotherapists. I do think that there's this very interesting thing between cocaine and ADHD.
Yeah.
It's a massive
crazy.
thing.
Well, they say that you're 20 times more likely to be an addict with ADHD, aren't you?
But some of these things, I come back to the same thing with everyone that's listening, or yourself better than any psychiatrist, any therapist, yeah? Just because someone who has ADHD like me, and you listen to me and you go, they take 30 milligrams of Elvance, and I feel like I'm like her, so if I do... Every single brain is different. Yeah. Every single one. We've got to stop pigeonholing addiction and pigeonholing mental health, because your trauma is different to mine, and how you've dealt with. You've managed to get sober and not doing, everyone is different. It's like you and I could both go on the same diet. You could lose 5 pounds, I could lose nothing.
Exactly.
Like there's just not this whole one size fits all thing. And that is why I think fellowship is so. I do think it's amazing because it's down to you to do that work.
How do you find... Apologies if this is a personal question.
No.
How do you find the religious element of the fellowship?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has. So my understanding of what AA was that it's a bunch of probably like 40-plus-year-olds who are alcoholics sit around a table and God heals them. But I also knew that I was desperate and I had nothing else. I was offered rehab by my mum and dad, but that was working for me once everything came out. And it is I think if you're desperate enough to want help, you will be open-minded. This book was written in the 1940s, right? And the word God is peppered throughout the whole thing. If you take it for what you want it to be, what I find so interesting is I think the modern version of religion is manifestation in the universe. Right? It's like for us, for our generation, we find it much easier to say, "Oh, I manifested that," than "I prayed for that." It's just a different word.
It's like believing that if you project the energy you want into the world will give it back.
Yeah, like it's cooler for us to say the universe than God. Like it's a word. It's believing. For me, it came down to one thing, and that's that Hannah's way, me running life on Hannah's terms, doesn't work. Right? And it's such a personal thing, but essentially it's about breaking down what you grew up with as what religion was, like breaking down those barriers, like,
someone sat at primary school on the bench, like,
and God is
bringing in cans for the Harvest Festival.
Do you know what I mean? And God is shaking the maracas, come by fucking R. Like God for me at a young age, for some reason, was a man in the sky with a beard. I have a understanding that I look at the last 6 months of my life. There is no fucking way that has all happened the way it's happened. Yes, it's come from me turning my life over to, handing it over to something greater than myself. Because Hannah's way doesn't work. I'm happy. At the end of my day, I do the same thing. It's become a ritual. I light candles in my bedroom. I have a playlist on Spotify that I put on. I sit at the end of my bed. I don't get on my knees and pray like they say. I sit at the end of my bed and I speak out loud about what I think I could have done better in the day. I give gratitude for the things I have. I played a victim mode person for many, many years. I'm very, I have a lot of things to be grateful for and thankful for. And I like to remember those. So when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm a better person. I pray for people who I manifest for people who I, have concerns for in my life. I pray for the still suffering alcoholic. I've taken what I need from AA and I've shaped it into my own thing. I don't, but if you're a woman going to AA, that whole book is based on a man being an alcoholic. There is a chapter in that book that says the wife of an alcoholic.
Jeez.
You have to take it for what it's worth. And I feel like if you have the barriers of, it's religion, that I know so many people in my groups who are atheists, still to this day, they've done the whole 12 steps, and they use the power of that room and the people in that room and the connection of that room to keep them sober. Lots of people go, "Oh, no one's like me in those rooms." I will always follow their story. So they sit at the front of the main chair and I will always be able to follow it up until a point and then it drops off. But that doesn't mean that you could never have got there. Ever. You must always look for similarities.
Fascinating you said that, because that's always been my very outsider's take on it. It was like, you don't have to believe in the God in order to believe in something that can push you forward. But it was just fascinating because the reason I asked, because I was with an American, an old client of mine who's American the other day at his gig, and he was talking about his brother who's in active addiction in America and been trying to get sober. But he was like, the problem in the US is that we still have a very religious focused program. And even his take and his words, not mine, that the AA, he felt like in America is still very God focused, to the point where it takes over. Whereas a lot of my friends in AA here have a very similar perspective to you. Like, they have surrendered themselves to the fact that there is something bigger, and they've surrendered themselves to the power that they have repurposed what the word God is. So it's quite fascinating. And
if you're an addict as well, you think you're the worst addict, you've done the worst things on the set. You've gone to a funeral hide, and you start talking to other addicts, you're like, fuck me.
You guys are right.
Christ. I'm a fucking angel.
Do you
know what I mean?
It's so true though. And we're all our own, it's funny because it's so funny with ego, isn't it? Because you often think you're better than others, but then when it comes to something like that, you always most want to be worse.
Yeah.
It's such a fucking weird dynamic.
But you get a greater understanding of all of these things, and a more diverse understanding of, seeing ego, like you're saying, in two ways.
Well, and also I learned a lot about, in therapy And the whole thing was like, we all have ego. Ego shouldn't be deemed as a negative word.
No.
It's how we like let our ego take over us. But ego essentially is like the essence of who we are as human beings.
This was like character defects. We're taught a lot about, you know, getting to terms with your character defects. And also, we have to remember that our upbringing conditions certain things about us. That doesn't mean you use it as an excuse to be, you know, angry or devious or whatever, but you recognize it and you change it. I've got this big thing that I like talking about at the moment, which is like this generational trauma. Like, we are in a generation now where we are able to have conversations like what we're doing now. We are so privileged that we get to do this, and our parents didn't have that. Okay, so like, we as a generation now have the ability to raise the next generation because we have healed ourselves. We are obviously ongoing projects, but like, we've dealt with some of the main shit.
Yeah, we can communicate. There's so, I think 40, 50 years ago in grandparents' generations, the amount of like abuse or whatever that would have just happened and people would have just assumed that was just how life was or was normal. I think now, obviously, awful stuff still happens, but I would hope that we're in a world where communication and accountability is getting better, you know. Social media is also poisonous as well, so it's like finding a balance of that, right?
But again, it's one of those things that anything that brings money, it's like the good and the bad. There's good. In active addiction, I was never going to see the good in social media because I was watching all the things that I shouldn't be watching. I was consumed by comparison. As soon as you start living life as the way that you're supposed to be living it and to your truth, people live. When I was in active addiction, I'm like, you'll find your tribe. Shut up. But you do. And I'm not going to have any friends. Make better friends when it's like, you know, all of these things that you're promised, they do come to fruition. But I always say to people, like, you've got to go through the growing pains. You're not going to go from that to that. You know, it's taken me 6 months to even go to a wedding. And everyone's different as well. Like, if you can go to a wedding after 30 days of sobriety, great, and you enjoyed it, fantastic. You know, I
think it's like, if you're trying to, and I was guilty of this for so many years, like, right, I want to lose weight, go to the gym 3 times, haven't noticed a difference, fuck it off.
Yeah.
And it's only been in my sobriety that I've really taught myself to be like, no, like, just keep going.
But also, right, and this is the thing with like gym and exercise and food. If you are, when you change your mindset on the fact that, okay, I'm going to go and do some exercise for my head, I'm not going to go and do exercise to lose weight. When you make that change in your mindset, all of a sudden, you're going to do exercise that you enjoy. If you're going to go and do a fucking circuit or strap yourself to a treadmill and you know that you're going to hate it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've got half an endorphin, but I've got to get myself there and I know the shit that's going to come with it.
Yeah, so true.
You go on a walk and put in a podcast and have a lovely time and you're out in nature. How much better do you feel? Like, you don't have to go and do, 70,000 marathons in a year. And, some people do want to do that. Yeah. My friend, Johnny Davis, has just ran the Capitals.
Wow.
And, like, amazing. And he's got Lululemon and he's got this, they're amazing. Like, so proud of him. But he gets something out of that. Yeah, I do not.
Yeah, I did one marathon. Never again.
But again, it's like what we were saying at the start of our journey. It's like, that's kind of what we were being shown was the only thing. I was thinking, not for me.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. Like, it's so amazing now just to see so many good, well-intended people come through, like yourself. And obviously I'm super tight with Millie, who's just a fucking superstar. And it's like, it's really amazing to see because I think there's such a beautiful shift coming, like with you doing the news thing the other day. And we were very kindly asked to do something on Radio 1. And it's like, how mad is it that like I was on Radio 1 last Christmas talking about how to be sober at Christmas? Yeah, it's mental. 2 Christmases ago, I would have been off my nut until 4 a.m. on Christmas.
This will be my first Christmas sober.
It's going to be good.
Can't wait.
Were you bizarre? This is mental. Yeah. I never drank on Christmas Day in my entire. Some people go off their nut on Christmas Day. I've never drank. Even in my depths of hell, I have a mental Christmas Eve, a mental Boxing Day. I don't know why, because everyone else around me would get drunk.
I think you have a very different thing of this stop. You were able to, I've been in situations where I've been at Christmas Eve in my room on my own after being at the pub surfing lines until, and then opening stockings in my parents' bedroom still fucked. And then that's the stuff where, that's the shame and the guilt of stuff I have to deal with. I'm a big advocate of, on my page, recently just did a video about carpet trawling, safer rummaging, trying to find that bag that you've definitely sniffed, but you're convinced it's in the bin.
Oh, yeah.
you know, I did run that funny, and I like to have fun with it, but I have a lot of things that I feel very ashamed
When
about.
there's a rock of cocaine on the floor that you're like picking up to then like pick
The tobacco out and shit out of, but you know, it's coke.
We were foul people.
Honestly, I've turned houses upside down.
Yeah, I'm the same.
The bins I've been through, didn't care.
Yeah, it's mad.
The insanity though, because actually you always, the thing is, that bag is never there. You sift it, but you convince yourself.
And I wished at the time I'd been like, I think deep down I knew, but it was never like, this is fucking mad.
Like turning into quite literally the neighbourhood watch, you know, like checking the way sometimes if I've got to like 4 days, right, so you're sleep deprived and like really it's just disgusting. The volume of the music was very important. The how dim or light the lights were. Going down to check the door was locked. Coming back up, checking through the blind. This like just hideous, and that was
so funny
fun.
You say that because oh my god, we're so similar. I always thought that was just me being like a good person on the sesh, but I was like, I'd slowly turn as it got to like 2 or 3 a.m. I'd turn the music down. Because it was always at my house. I was like, everyone come over, and it was the same thing. Doors.
Did you like hosting?
Down. I loved hosting.
Yeah, same.
I had to host.
Yeah.
Didn't like it really anyway. Well, I had one safe space in London, but other than that, I was always the host.
Yeah.
I'd pay for people to get cabs out of town to mine, which is like 30 miles out of London, to come over.
Yeah, because you've got your own bed and you're like in your own
safe
safety
space.
Yeah.
The cat's there. Like, it felt good.
Yeah, I've had like a few times like that where I'm not joking. I would spend my life savings to get home because I can't do that whole, you know, when that dynamic of the sesh changes, especially if you're with people that you don't necessarily know that well. 1 minute you're talking about your grandma's like fucking, I don't know, funeral. The next minute you're like, they've started. They've started coming down before you. You know, there's no drugs left, and all of a sudden they're looking at you like, and it's like, I need to leave. I've also been in situations where I'm the host, and I have people like that there. They don't know how to read the room.
Yeah. I had it once where someone came downstairs and there was just like still people. And I was like, I'm gonna get to bed, and they was like, yeah, we'll go. And I came downstairs like 4 hours later, and people are still there.
Do you have like sort of any sort of advice for someone who wants to start the journey?
There's no time like the present. I think it's probably the most important one, and it's like, you know, I think for me and my friend who are both at the real depths of like, this isn't good, to just do it. And I also think my advice for people is like, be open with people. Like, there's no shame in admitting that you need help, and there's no shame in admitting that you want to better yourself, because ultimately it's no different to someone being like, hey, I think I'm really overweight and I want to get better. It's like, hey, I'm really not in a good place at this and I want to get better. So just communicating it, and that was a big thing for me. Also, like, yeah, find the friends who understand, because the ones that don't aren't your friends. And that is, like you said it earlier, and it's completely bang on. If someone is going to challenge you for trying to better your life, they're not worth having in your life. And they'll come back around if they understand it, but if they don't,
it's not down to anybody else to tell you if you have a problem. So like, if you have friends sitting there being like, oh, but you only did it this weekend, it's like, if you're not happy, you're not happy. And you will have to, you know, people have this big thing about, oh, I've known them for my whole life. If you want to grow and you want to develop, you're going to go through a sieving out process. And what you'll find interesting is that at the start you think, I'm going to miss them and my life won't be the same, because you don't know life without that person. If you don't escape, you will form into the environment that you stay in. And like,
well, it's like you and I, right? I use cocaine as like, I talk about cocaine almost like it's a person, because it's probably my longest ever relationship and my most toxic one.
Yeah.
And I thought there wasn't a world where I wouldn't do drugs. And that now it's like, I can't ever imagine a world where I do them and life is so much better.
So funny how they were your whole life, and like I used to think to myself, I'll never escape it, you know? It's around, it's everywhere. Since I've removed myself, not one part of my life am I around it, really.
It's so fascinating now. Cause I still obviously go to places and there's a lot of people on it, but sometimes my mate will be like, oh, they were so coked up. And I'm like, really? Like, you'd think for like the person who was like the most coked up person, obviously if someone's like fucking like draw like a pirate ship, I notice, but I don't notice people passing bags that much.
The obsession has been lifted from you.
It was so obsessive, wasn't it? Like I'd be thinking about when's acceptable to the first line. Like you say, planning, okay, well, I'm going out tonight, but then I might go out tomorrow, I might go through. So like, what should have been a £50 like bag turned into like 200 quid. And then I was like, because I didn't want it to end, I'd then be like fucking giving it out like Santa Claus. So all these things are just like obsessive behaviours. They're so dumb, and for me anyway. And now I'm out of it. I'm like, fuck me. I don't recognise that version of me.
Yeah, I find that quite bizarre. And how long I allowed myself to sit in that, even though I knew that I was unhappy and I wasn't living life authentically.
Yeah, and the amount of, I mean, I don't want to think about money, but like honestly, it's in the hundreds of thousands of pounds.
I would not be, looking after someone's property whilst they're away. I would have my own home.
Yeah.
I used to get classic conversation on the sesh. Oh, the government, it's fucked, and how's anyone our age supposed to get on the property ladder? Bollocks! I could have definitely got on the property ladder. I just chose to shove it up my nose.
It's mad. I was saying the other day, I'm
not saying the government is not fucked, by the way.
my app now is like harrowing because it says that I've saved like 46 grand.
What app do you use?
I Am Sober. And that's what's crazy as well, because there's obviously like a limit at a cash point. So sometimes I'd be like transferring money to like different cards of mine so I could get out more than the 250 quid.
But when you get the yes, that's for me was always more of a fucking hit than actually getting the gear.
100%. The idea, I still now will get this buzz of like thinking about the idea, like say I would walk across to the Tesco Express, get like, bottle of Pinot Grigio and 4 Stellas and send the text. And that buzz of like that interaction was more than the 3 a.m. So what is a dopamine hit, right? Essentially, you're chasing that next.
I think a lot of it
thing.
Is like giving into that second voice and then it kind of easing. It's like ease and comfort of okay, I'm going to allow myself to have this. I deserve it, And then as that voice gets louder and louder and louder that it's a problem, it gets harder and harder. That's why relapse, for example, is when you go sober, you ruin ever going back to it. It's never going to be. I was a serial relapser when before I surrendered to sobriety. I stopped fighting it, stopped negotiating with it. But like, it ruins it because you know that you're trying not to do it, and it's just.
Now, would you feel like
I don't have a relapse in me?
Yeah, like you. Because for me now, and forget the podcast, forget anything else, like just me and me, I could not let myself down like that. Like I'm so accountable to myself now.
I said this to my therapist, my mum and my dad, and I genuinely mean it. Like if that happened, I know what it looks like. I have a very healthy fear of it. The guilt and the shame and the guilt, and I wouldn't be able to lie about it. But I know that it would take something. I don't know what it would take for me to get there, but it would be me, an 8 ball on my own. Yeah. It's not me trying to glamorize it, get back to it being fun.
It's not.
Never.
Because it by the end wasn't fun, and like as much as you're like, well, hey, you're like that wasn't good. No, I totally agree. That's the.
I don't ever want to go back to that, and if I drink and I take drugs, that's where I go back to.
Yeah. Also, you never go back to the fun bit.
Never.
Do you?
It wasn't fun for such a long time. Thank you for being a class A person.
Well, thank you. That was amazing. I just enjoy.
It's so fun. It's lovely, and it was so nice to have you. And thank you for driving down.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for
coming on my
podcast.
podcast.
I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing.